Hey there, tonight we're uncovering how Roman citizens navigated the Great Fire of Rome, where the truth is more about resilience than the chaos often portrayed. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy. Maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. You're in Rome, Ad 64, where the air is thick with the scent of commerce and sweat, and the streets hum with the energy of a million souls packed into the urban sprawl. The city is a bustling, chaotic masterpiece of ancient engineering, a testament to Roman ambition, with its aqueducts and temples casting long shadows over the tightly knit neighborhoods. It's a place where the elite strut along the marble floors of palatial villas, while the common folk elbow their way through labyrinthine alleys, living in multi-story wooden insulae, apartment buildings that seem to defy gravity and, quite frankly, common sense. Now, these wooden tenements are an arsonist's dream, and they're stacked like kindling just waiting for a spark. Enter the Great Fire of Rome, a catastrophe that would leave the city smoldering and its people scrambling. This wasn't just a bad day at the office. It was a disaster of epic proportions. The fire began on July 18th in the Merchant District, a place already notorious for its flammable goods. Think oils, spices, and plenty of fabric. In a city where the average summer temperature could roast a leg of lamb, it's not surprising that when the fire started, it spread like a scandalous rumor. Forget the romantic notion of Emperor Nero playing the fiddle while Rome turned to ash. Sorry to break it to you, but fiddles didn't even exist in ancient Rome. The guy supposedly had a lyre, but there's no solid evidence he strummed a single string during the blaze. In fact, Nero was out of town when the fire began. The myth likely came about because people love a good villain, and Nero was an easy target, a ruler who was about as popular as a tax collector at a toga party. As the fire raged, it consumed 10 of Rome's 14 districts, burning for 6 days straight before it was finally under control, only to flare up again just when everyone thought the worst was over. Imagine the sheer panic as flames swallowed whole neighborhoods in hours, with the wind spreading embers faster than you could say Julius Caesar. People fled their homes, clutching whatever valuables they could carry, abandoning everything else to the inferno. In the chaos, rumors spread faster than the fire itself. Some whispered that Nero had started the fire himself, perhaps to clear land for his grand architectural ambitions, like the Domus Aurea, his planned palace that would make ordinary opulence look like a pauper's shack. Others speculated about divine retribution or cosmic punishment. What's clear is that in the pandemonium, survival was the name of the game. With the city in flames, the economic impact was brutal. The damage was estimated in the millions of sesterces, fortune back then, enough to bankrupt a province. Rome's economy was as diverse as it was vast, powered by trade, agriculture, and the spoils of conquest. The fire threatened to burn through not just buildings, but the very lifeblood of the city. In the aftermath, Nero would undertake ambitious reconstruction efforts, widening streets and imposing new building codes to prevent another disaster. But in those initial days, as the fire crackled and popped, all that lay ahead was uncertainty. For the Romans caught in the blaze, it was a time of fear, desperation, and survival. As you wander through the smoke-choked streets, you can't help but wonder what the future holds for this eternal city and its resilient citizens. As you wander through the smoke-choked streets, you can't help but wonder what the future holds for this eternal city and its resilient citizens. But there's no time for philosophical musing when there's a raging inferno snapping at your heels. The Romans, ever resourceful and used to the whims of fate, quickly pivoted into survival mode. In the absence of a comprehensive evacuation plan, because let's face it, planning ahead wasn't exactly Rome's strong suit at the time, citizens took matters into their own hands. First, there were the makeshift fire breaks. Picture this. Desperate Romans tearing down their own homes to create gaps and slow the fire's advance. It was a drastic measure, sure, but when the choice was between possibly losing everything and definitely losing everything, it seemed like the sensible option. Think of it as an ancient form of urban renewal, albeit with a lot more panic and far fewer zoning laws. They'd pull down anything flammable, hoping that the guards were in the mood for mercy. Enter the Vigiles, Rome's answer to a fire brigade, though they were more like a rowdy crew of night watchmen with a side hustle in firefighting. Established by Augustus in 6 AD, the Vigiles were a blend of firefighters and police force, tasked with keeping the peace and dousing flames. Armed with buckets, axes, and an unshakable will, they formed bucket brigades to douse the flames. Not exactly a high-pressure hose, but better than nothing. And as you might guess, they had a rough go of it. The fire didn't play by the rules. It jumped across streets, snaked its way through alleys, and even the mighty Vigiles found themselves outmatched by the sheer scale and fury of the blaze. Meanwhile, the economic impact was a punch to the gut that Rome could ill afford. The loss of property was staggering. Imagine watching your life's possessions turn to ash in a matter of hours. The wealthier citizens, who could afford insulae made of sturdier stuff, watched in horror as their fortunes smoldered. For the common folk, who didn't have the luxury of diversification in their assets, fire was a swift reminder of how precarious their lives were. It wasn't just about losing homes. It was about the disappearance of marketplaces, workshops, and the very infrastructure that kept Rome's economy humming. This economic vacuum created a bizarre market dynamic. With scarcity came opportunity, and opportunists came crawling out of the woodwork like ants at a picnic. Prices for essential goods skyrocketed. Bread, once a staple, became a luxury item. Property developers, or as they would have been called back then, opportunistic land grabbers, swooped in to buy up burnt-out plots for a song, betting on a lucrative rebuild. It was capitalism on ancient steroids, proving that even 2,000 years ago, there was always someone ready to make a denarius off disaster. And while the city's elders debated and the Vigiles sweated, historians like Tacitus were taking notes. Tacitus, a man with a sharp quill and an even sharper tongue, would later paint a vivid picture of the chaos. He noted how Nero, ever the misunderstood artist, opened his gardens to the homeless and arranged for food supplies to be brought in actions perhaps meant to soothe public anger or simply to save face. Tacitus, never one to shy away from drama, also chronicled the rumors swirling around Nero's involvement, capturing the public's imagination with tales that would outlast the flames themselves. In this swirling maelstrom of fire, fear, and fury, the Romans were living on the edge, balancing survival with the faint hope of a brighter, less flammable future. They were a people who, even as their world crumbled around them, could still muster a defiant Roman stoicism, a shrugging acceptance that this, too, was part of the grand tapestry of their city's narrative. As the embers cooled and the dust settled, the story of the Great Fire was far from over. There were still lessons to learn, blame to assign, and from the ashes, a new Rome to be imagined. But for now, survival was enough. Survival might have been enough in that immediate, smoke-streaked aftermath, but the Romans, ever pragmatic, knew they had a long road ahead. The Great Fire of AD 64 didn't just leave behind a charred cityscape. It revealed the social fabric of Rome, one that was both resilient and fragile. As the smoke cleared and the dust settled, the wealthy citizens of Rome saw an opportunity for their own kind of heroism. With their insulae mostly reduced to rubble, the urban poor were left with nowhere to go. Enter the patricians, those toga-clad titans of Roman society, who decided it was time to play the role of benevolent benefactor. They opened their homes and gardens, offering shelter and sustenance, who knew that beneath those marble veneers lay hearts capable of charity. Of course, the cynic might say that it was as much about shoring up their social capital as it was about compassion. After all, there's nothing like a bit of public gratitude to keep the political wolves at bay. The religious groups also stepped up to the plate, carving out their own piece of the humanitarian pie. Pagan temples distributed what little they could spare, channeling the goodwill of the gods, or maybe just hoping to keep the populace from questioning divine intentions. An interesting footnote in this tale is the Christians, who were still considered a bizarre offshoot of Judaism at the time. These communities, often marginalized and misunderstood, banded together to offer aid, proving that love thy neighbor wasn't just a catchy phrase. Unfortunately, this altruism didn't score them any points with the emperor. More on that in a bit. But let's not sugarcoat the situation. The Romans were still a people in the grip of an existential crisis. As the city's elite played the part of civic saviors, the political landscape was just as fiery as the recent conflagration. Nero, our infamous emperor was in the thick of it. Now, Nero might have opened his gardens to the displaced and organized grain shipments to prevent famine, but he wasn't above a bit of political theater. He needed a scapegoat to deflect the blame for the devastation. Enter the Christians. In one of history's more infamous PR moves, Nero pointed the finger at the fledgling Christian community. Tacitus, the historian with a penchant for dramatic flair, would later record how Nero accused them of starting the fire, describing their persecution in vivid, if not entirely unbiased, detail. It was a political gamble that would make Machiavelli proud. By shifting the blame, Nero hoped to quell the growing unrest and redirect the public's ire. In a city where rumor spread faster than a Twitter thread, the Christians became an easy target. Public sentiment during this crisis was a swirling mix of suspicion and desperation. Nero's popularity was already on shaky ground. The fire was just the latest in a string of controversies. The people, already disgruntled with high taxes and Nero's eccentricities, like competing in chariot races and his penchant for artistic pursuits, were quick to embrace conspiracy theories. Was the emperor really that out of touch? Had he deliberately set the city ablaze to make way for his architectural dreams? The whispers wouldn't be silenced. But even in the midst of political machinations, the social dynamics were fascinating. The economic divide was stark. Yet in this moment of crisis, the lines blurred. Community efforts emerged organically, with neighbors helping neighbors and strangers becoming allies. It was a testament to human resilience, the kind of unplanned solidarity that even the most robust civic plans couldn't orchestrate. The aftermath of the fire wasn't just a story of destruction, it was a reset button for Roman society. As rebuilding plans took shape, the city's leaders faced the monumental task of reimagining Rome. Nero's new building codes were a step towards a safer, more fire-resistant cityscape. Wider streets, lower building heights, and more space between structures were introduced. It was urban planning born of necessity, a blueprint for survival rather than aesthetics. And yet, despite these forward-thinking measures, the specter of the fire lingered. It was a reminder of Rome's vulnerability, a city that had once thought itself eternal, now confronting its own mortality. The Great Fire wasn't just a calamity, it was a catalyst for change, forcing the Romans to reconsider their relationship with their environment and each other. As the city slowly rose from the ashes, the Romans found themselves at a crossroads. Would they learn from the past, or were they doomed to repeat their mistakes? The Great Fire had laid bare the best and worst of Roman society, complex tapestry of ambition and altruism, hubris and humility. And in the midst of it all, the eternal city soldiered on, its people as much a part of its story as the stones and streets they called home. But the tale of Rome in those fiery days is far from over. With rebuilding comes fresh challenges, new power plays, and the ever-present question of how an empire grapples with its own identity. So, as the dust clears and the city begins to hum with life again, one can't help but wonder what lessons the Romans will take to heart, and which they'll conveniently forget as they march inexorably into the future. And so, as the dust cleared, Rome stood at a crossroads, draped in the ashes of its former self, poised for a transformation that would be nothing short of monumental. The Great Fire had set the stage for a dramatic urban overhaul, and Nero, ever the visionary, or tyrant, depending on your sources, was ready to seize the opportunity. Forget the grand narrative of a phoenix rising. This was more like a practical attempt to ensure the city didn't go up in flames again the next time someone sneezed near a candle. Nero's new building regulations were a masterclass in crisis management, with a sprinkle of what we might call ancient urban planning. Gone were the days of cramped wooden insulae, where fire spread faster than gossip at a gladiator match. In their place, Nero demanded wider streets and lower buildings, a revolutionary approach in a city that had previously been built like a game of Jenga with shardy craftsmanship. The new cityscape was designed to prevent future fires from leaping from one structure to another, and it aimed to make Rome both safer and more navigable. But let's be real. The changes weren't just about public safety. They were also about power, prestige, and Nero's not-so-secret ambition to imprint his legacy on the city. Imagine having the chance to redesign the capital of the world's most powerful empire. It was an opportunity Nero couldn't resist, and he didn't shy away from making his mark. The new regulations stipulated the use of fireproof materials like brick and concrete, Rome's answer to asbestos, only with fewer lawsuits. The cost of these materials, however, was not something your average Roman could shoulder. This was no DIY home improvement project. It was a top-down reconstruction that put the elite firmly in control. And while Nero was busy redrawing the city's blueprint, the social fabric of Rome was undergoing its own redesign. The rebuilding process created a peculiar economic ecosystem, a melting pot of opportunity and exploitation. Let's break it down. On one hand, the construction boom meant jobs. Lots of them. Skilled laborers, artisans, architects, they were in high demand. And for once, the plebeians had a bit of leverage. Wages for skilled workers soared like eagles, or at least pigeons. Let's not get too carried away. On the other hand, the average Roman citizen, particularly those who'd been scraping by before the fire, found themselves caught in a vicious cycle. The new building standards drove up property prices, making it impossible for the lower classes to afford new homes in the rebuilt city. They were effectively priced out, pushed to the periphery both physically and economically. Nero's grand vision had inadvertently widened the gap between the haves and the have-nots, turning the city's center into a playground for the wealthy. The economic repercussions didn't stop there. With the reconstruction came a wave of speculative investments. Opportunistic land developers, the ancient equivalent of modern-day real estate moguls, swooped in to snatch up parcels of land for a fraction of their worth. They gambled on the city's rebirth, flipping properties faster than you could say Rome wasn't built in a day. But let's not romanticize these transactions. For many, it was a cutthroat business, the kind that would make Wall Street brokers blush. Meanwhile, the political landscape was as tumultuous as ever. Nero's efforts to rebuild Rome were simultaneously a bid for redemption and a power play. He funded the reconstruction through a combination of increased taxes and the spoils of conquest, a strategy that didn't exactly win him any popularity contests. But for Nero, it was about legacy. The new Rome would be a testament to his reign, a tangible symbol of his rule, a domus aurea on a citywide scale, minus the exorbitant gold leaf. Yet, despite the grandeur of Nero's plans, there was a palpable tension in the air. The Roman populace, still reeling from the fire, harbored a simmering resentment. Many saw Nero's building projects not as a gift to the city, but as a vanity project, a way to immortalize himself at the expense of those who had lost everything. And while Nero may have been the architect of Rome's new look, it was the people who had to live with it, for better or worse. As the city began to rise from the ashes, the changes were more than just structural. They were cultural. The fire had burned away not just wood and stone, but also a way of life. Rome was becoming more cosmopolitan, more centralized, and more distinctly hierarchical. The new urban landscape reflected a shift in Roman identity, from a city of the people to a city of power. In the end, the rebuilding of Rome was a paradox, a tale of rebirth that underscored the fragility of existence. It was a testament to resilience. It had also highlighted the inequalities that ran through the veins of the empire. The fire had forced Rome to confront its vulnerabilities, and the rebuilding process laid bare the societal fractures that many preferred to ignore. The Eternal City was changing, and with it, the lives of its citizens. But as history has shown, change is never straightforward, and the repercussions of Nero's ambitious plans would echo through the ages. So, as the bricks were laid, and the scaffolding rose, one couldn't help but wonder. In their quest to forge a new Rome, what had the Romans truly gained, and what had they lost? As the city faced the future, the lessons of the past remained unresolved, leaving the door wide open for new chapters to be written in its storied history. It's a tough gig trying to rebuild an empire's crown jewel from the ground up, especially when the ashes are still warm. But Rome, with its flair for drama and its appetite for ambition, didn't shy away from the challenge. The Great Fire of AD 64 didn't just leave a smudge on Nero's reputation. It dragged him through the proverbial mud and back again. His legacy, post-fire, is like a Roman mosaic, pieces of grandeur and scandal fit together in a pattern that's both mesmerizing and messy. Let's start with Nero, the emperor whose PR department could have used a lesson or two in crisis management. Post-fire, Nero became a paragon of controversy. Sure, he enacted building codes that would make any modern urban planner nod in approval, but his motives were as clear as a politician's promise during an election year. Was he a visionary leader steering Rome to a safer future, or a self-serving despot intent on immortalizing his name in stone and flame? The jury's still out, though history hasn't exactly been kind to Nero. We remember him less for his urban improvements, and more for his tragic opera of a life, filled with familial drama, artistic ambitions, and a penchant for courtroom theatrics involving Christians. Nero's new building regulations were a cocktail of practicality and power. His insistence on wider streets and lower buildings was a stroke of genius, a move that shaped urban planning long after his own fall from grace. It was a pivot from the chaotic Jenga tower of Rome's former architecture to something resembling a structured grid. The use of fire-resistant materials like brick and concrete wasn't just a safeguard against future infernos. It was a declaration of Rome's resilience. But let's not get too starry-eyed. The economic reality was that these changes came with a price tag heftier than a gladiator's diet of barley and beans. The new Rome wasn't for everyone. It was a city being crafted for the elite, a marble-clad fortress where wealth could build a bulwark against disaster. And what about the lasting impact on Roman infrastructure? Nero's urban facelift did more than just spruce up the skyline. It set a precedent. Future emperors would borrow from his playbook, realizing that a city's safety net needed more than just divine protection. Fire safety became an integral part of city planning, a lesson learned from the charred remains of Rome's past. It wasn't just about preventing another great fire. It was about ensuring that the heart of the empire could withstand the whims of fate and flame. The idea that urban resilience could be engineered, not just hoped for, was a groundbreaking shift in thinking. But the fire did more than scorch Nero's reputation and reshape the cityscape. It also seared its way into Roman law, becoming the kind of tale told around communal fires long after the city had been rebuilt. The Great Fire became a narrative touchstone, a symbol of Rome's vulnerability and tenacity. It was a story that resonated, partly because of its drama, and partly because it was a reminder that even the mightiest city could be brought to its knees by something as simple as a stray spark. In the grand tapestry of Roman history, the Great Fire serves as a cautionary tale. It's a reminder that urban resilience isn't just about bricks and mortar. It's about community, adaptability, and foresight. The Romans, with their talent for turning adversity into opportunity, laid the groundwork for future generations to think critically about how cities function and how they can be fortified against disaster. And while Nero's footprint on the city was eventually overshadowed by subsequent emperors, the lessons learned from the fire lingered. So, what's the takeaway from this fiery saga? It's a testament to human nature's dual capacity for destruction and reconstruction. The Great Fire of Rome isn't just a tale of ashes and ambition. It's a story about how civilizations grapple with their own fragility. It's about how a city, when faced with obliteration, can choose to rise, phoenix-like, from its ruins, albeit with a lot more planning and fewer mythical birds involved. And for us modern folk, the legacy of the Great Fire is a touchpoint for urban development and disaster preparedness. It's a historical reminder that cities must be designed with both beauty and safety in mind. It's about learning from the past, acknowledging the mistakes and triumphs of our predecessors, and crafting urban landscapes that honor their legacy without replicating their follies. In the end, the Great Fire of Rome isn't just a chapter in a dusty history book. It's a living story, a narrative thread that weaves through the ages, urging us to reflect on how we build our cities and how we protect them. It's a reminder that while we may not face the same challenges as the Romans, the lessons they left behind are as relevant today as they were in the smoky aftermath of AD 64. So, as you drift off to sleep, let the story of Rome's fire and rebirth flicker in your mind, a testament to resilience, reinvention, and the enduring spirit of an eternal city. If ancient traders had LinkedIn profiles, they'd probably list Silk Road Navigator as their top skill. Back around 130 BCE, an ambitious web of trade routes stretched over 4,000 miles, connecting the powerhouse economies of China, India, Persia, and Rome in a way that any modern-day logistics manager would envy. This wasn't just a road. It was an artery of commerce pumping goods, culture, and ideas between East and West. And at the heart of this ancient supply chain was silk, the ancient world's answer to luxury tech. Think of it as the gold-plated iPhone of its day. Now, before you roll your eyes at the idea of fabric being such a big deal, consider this. Silk was a sensation because it was both a status symbol and a technological marvel. Its production was a state secret, tightly guarded by the Chinese for centuries. To even whisper the secrets of silk making outside the empire was a bit like leaking the code to the latest smartphone. Expect serious consequences. The stuff was so valuable, it was literally worth its weight in gold. Forget Bitcoin. In ancient Rome, an ounce of silk could set you back as much as an ounce of gold. That's the kind of investment that makes even the most extravagant modern fashion brand seem like a bargain. But silk wasn't the only item getting traded across this vast network of routes. The Silk Road was the ancient world's buffet, with everything from spices and precious metals to glassware and exotic animals being swapped between cultures. The route was a marketplace of novelties and necessities, catering to the eclectic tastes and needs of empires and common folk alike. Geographically, the Silk Road was no cakewalk. It spanned from the bustling cities of China, like Xi'an, to the Mediterranean ports of Antioch, crossing treacherous terrain that included the Taklamakan Desert, a place so inhospitable its name translates to "you can get in, but you can never get out." Not exactly the tagline you'd want for your next vacation destination. Yet, despite the dangers of deserts and mountains, this road was the lifeline for economies and ideas. Key players in this historic trade drama were the Han Chinese, who kick-started the Silk Road under the reign of Emperor Wu. They wanted to trade their silk for the fine horses of Central Asia. These weren't just any horses. These were the Ferrari stallions of the ancient world, crucial for both military and economic power. Meanwhile, the Parthians and Persians controlled the middle sections of the route, acting like the toll booths of their day, extracting taxes and fees in exchange for passage and protection. Talk about having a monopoly on the highway. And at the western end, the Romans were eager consumers of silk, spices, and other exotic goods, ready to flaunt their wealth with the latest Eastern luxuries. But let's not romanticize too much. While the Silk Road is often depicted as a path of peaceful exchange, it was also a corridor of conquest and control. Empires rose and fell along this artery, and caravans faced the constant threat of bandits and unstable politics. It wasn't all about noble traders and the peaceful exchange of culture. Often, it was about who could control the most lucrative sections, who could levy the most taxes, and who could outsmart the competition. Despite its challenges, the Silk Road's impact was profound. It wasn't just goods that traveled these routes. Ideas, religions, technologies, and even diseases made the journey. Buddhism spread from India to China, forever altering the spiritual landscape of Asia. Technological innovations like papermaking and the compass found new homes, reshaping societies. Even the Black Death made its way westward, proving that not all exchanges were beneficial. In short, the Silk Road was a complex web of commerce and culture, a testament to human ingenuity and the insatiable desire for connection. It was a marketplace of marvels and miseries, where fortunes were made and lost. And it all started with the simple yet profound desire to drape oneself in silk, the fabric that spun a world together. And speaking of a world spun together by silk, let's unravel the tapestry of cultural exchanges that the Silk Road wove across continents. Picture it like the original internet, but with sand dunes instead of servers. Sure, silk was the showstopper, but the real magic lay in the exchange of ideas, languages, and religions, which traveled alongside the caravans like retweets in the ancient world. First off, let's talk languages. The Silk Road was a linguistic melting pot where tongues mingled more than at an international kissing booth. Travelers needed to communicate across vast regions, so languages like Sogdian, Persian, and Greek became the lingua francas of trade. This wasn't just about haggling over the price of silk. It was about forging connections. Imagine a Roman trader in Antioch trying to converse with a Chinese merchant from Chang'an. It's like trying to decode a text message from your teenage niece. But somehow, through a mix of sign language, translators, and the universal language of gold coins, they managed. Religions also hitched a ride on the Silk Road, turning it into a spiritual superhighway. Buddhism was the ancient version of going viral, spreading from India to China and beyond, thanks to the efforts of monks like Faxian and Xuanzang, who were basically the influencers of their day. They didn't have Instagram, but they did have scrolls, which were the ancient equivalent of a Twitter thread. These monks trekked thousands of miles to bring sacred texts and teachings across the continent, altering the spiritual landscapes of entire regions. By the time Buddhism reached China, it had picked up a few cultural souvenirs along the way, adapting to local customs and beliefs like a savvy tourist. But let's not forget the other religions that tagged along for the ride. Zoroastrianism, Manichaeism, and Nestorian Christianity spread their doctrines along the trade routes, mixing and mingling in a spiritual smorgasbord. It was like a theological food court where ideas were as exotic as the spices. And with all these religions in the mix, you can bet there were a few misunderstandings. Picture a Roman trying to make sense of reincarnation, or a Chinese Confucian scholar wrapping his head around the concept of original sin. Misunderstandings were inevitable, but they also sparked dialogue, debate, and occasionally, enlightenment. Now, let's zoom in on the exchange of ideas. The Silk Road was a think tank on wheels, where technological innovations like papermaking and the compass found new homes. Traders weren't just swapping goods, they were swapping blueprints for the future. The Chinese invention of paper, for example, eventually made its way to the Islamic world, and then to Europe, revolutionizing communication. Before paper, writing was mostly done on cumbersome materials like clay tablets or papyrus, which were about as convenient as carrying around a stone tablet with your grocery list etched in it. The compass, another Chinese innovation, slowly migrated west, changing the navigation game forever. It wasn't until centuries later that European explorers would use it to cross oceans, but its humble beginnings on the Silk Road laid the groundwork for the age of exploration. Ideas flowed back the other way too. The West offered glass-blowing techniques that dazzled the East like a medieval TikTok tutorial. And speaking of exchanges, let's not ignore the darker side of this cultural swap meet. Along with silks and spices, diseases also made the rounds. The Silk Road was the express lane for plagues, most notoriously the Black Death, which hitched a ride on fleas and rats and decimated populations across Europe and Asia. It's a grim reminder that not all exchanges were beneficial, a historical footnote that highlights the double-edged sword of connectivity. But as we navigate this ancient web of interaction, it's crucial to remember that the Silk Road didn't just change the economies of the world. It changed the very fabric of societies. The exchange of languages enriched cultures, religions reshaped spiritual landscapes, and ideas propelled technological growth. The Silk Road was the ultimate connector, a testament to human ingenuity and the timeless desire to explore beyond our borders, both physically and intellectually. So, as we pause to catch our breath on this historical journey, let's remember that the Silk Road was more than just a trade route. It was a social media network without the selfies, a melting pot without the fondue. And while it may not have had the digital convenience of today, it was a living, breathing artery of exchange, bringing the world closer in ways that continue to echo through history. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel this rich tapestry of human connection in the adventures ahead. And so, as we continue our whirlwind tour of the Silk Road, let's dive headfirst into the political chessboard that was the ancient world. Picture a game where the pieces are empires, the board stretches across continents, and the stakes are nothing short of domination and survival. Forget friendly neighborhood trade. The Silk Road was more like the Wild West meets Game of Thrones, with a touch of monopoly, where everyone wanted boardwalk, but it was actually the Taklamakan Desert. First, let's bring in the Roman Empire, the swaggering superstar of the Western world, whose emperors had a taste for silk that rivaled a modern-day influencer's obsession with brand-name handbags. The Romans weren't just passive consumers lounging in their togas. They were active players in the Silk Road saga. Emperor Augustus, for instance, had an eye on those lucrative eastern markets as early as 27 BCE, sending envoys to China to open up direct trade lines. Talk about ambitious networking. And by the time the good old Emperor Tiberius came around, the Roman Senate was in an uproar about the drain of gold to the east, thanks to the empire's insatiable silk appetite. They were bleeding gold coins like a leaky faucet. Estimates suggest that around 100 million sesterces annually were traded away for silk and spices. That's a lot of toga money. On the opposite end of the Silk Road, The Han Dynasty stood tall, wielding their own brand of power and influence. These guys were the original supply chain strategists, long before logistics became a buzzword. Emperor Wu of Han, the sharp strategist, wasn't about to let the Romans or anyone else have all the fun. He wanted those Central Asian horses, the Ferrari stallions of the steppe, and he was prepared to trade silk to get them. But like any savvy leader, he also knew that controlling the Silk Road was about more than just securing a trade in horsepower. It was about cementing China's place as a formidable global power. As these empires jostled for control, the Silk Road itself became the ultimate prize. Whoever held the keys to these trade routes could command a fortune and influence politics on a grand scale. The Parthian Empire, sandwiched between the Romans and the Han, knew this all too well. They played the role of middlemen with all the finesse of a seasoned diplomat and the cunning of a shrewd businessman. Think of them as the toll booth operators of the ancient world, charging a premium for safe passage through their territory. They had an iron grip on the routes from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, and they weren't letting go anytime soon. But it wasn't all silk and spices. The Silk Road was a corridor of power struggles and betrayals, a political minefield where espionage was as common as bartering. Forget the notion of a peaceful trading era. This was a world where spies were as valuable as merchants. The Romans, for instance, sent agents eastward to gather intelligence on Parthian military capabilities. Even the Han had their own network of informants, keeping tabs on the ever-shifting alliances and rivalries along the route. It was espionage in sandals, and it was ruthless. And let's not ignore the small players, those city-states and minor kingdoms scattered along the route who, despite their size, wielded significant influence. Places like Samarkand and Bukhara were not just waypoints. They were vibrant hubs of culture and commerce, each with its own political machinations. They switched allegiances faster than a reality TV star switches alliances, always looking for the best deal to ensure their survival in a world dominated by giants. The strategic importance of the Silk Road wasn't just about economy. It was about military might. Control the road, and you controlled the flow of troops and information. During the reign of Emperor Trajan in the early 2nd century CE, the Romans even attempted to extend their reach towards the Persian Gulf, eyeing the rich trade routes that lay beyond. Meanwhile, the Han Dynasty was reinforcing its borders, setting up military outposts like beacon towers along the Great Wall, watching for any signs of trouble from the Xiongnu and other nomadic tribes who saw the Silk Road as their personal hunting ground. Yet, amid this high-stakes game of power, the myth of a harmonious trading era persists. It's a romantic vision, akin to imagining pirates as lovable rogues instead of cutthroat thieves. The reality was messier, filled with backstabbing alliances and fleeting truces. The region was a patchwork of shifting loyalties, where today's ally could quickly become tomorrow's foe. Take, for example, the infamous Sogdians, Central Asian traders who were nothing short of legendary for their mercantile prowess. They were the middlemen par excellence, facilitating trade between East and West with unrivaled skill. But they were also cunning negotiators who played both sides against the middle, ensuring their own prosperity in a turbulent world. They were like the ancient world's version of a tech startup, nimble and always one step ahead of the competition. And let's not forget the unsung heroes, or villains, depending on your viewpoint, the bandits and marauders who saw the Silk Road as a buffet of opportunity. Tales of daring heists and caravan raids were common as these outlaws exploited the vast, unguarded stretches of the route. They were the ancient equivalent of cybercriminals, hacking into the trade network for their own gain. Yet, their presence also spurred the development of better security measures, such as fortified caravanserais and convoy systems, highlighting the age-old dance between security and exploitation. In essence, the Silk Road was a marketplace of political maneuvering, where empires clashed, alliances were forged and broken, and fortunes were won and lost. It was a theater of human ambition, driven by the desire to control the arteries of trade, and by extension, the flow of power itself. As we delve deeper into this tangled web of history, let's keep our eyes wide open to the complexities and contradictions that define this iconic route. A road paved with silk, ambition, and more than a few secrets left to uncover. But let's hit pause on this saga of intrigue and empire building to spotlight the moment when the Silk Road started to look more like an overgrown footpath than a bustling highway of trade. Fast forward to the 15th century, a time when a few significant shifts turned the Silk Road from a main thoroughfare into a historical footnote. Let's talk about how the Ottomans, maritime trade, and a handful of other factors pulled the plug on what was once the ancient world's golden network of exchange. First up, the Ottoman Empire, which you could say had its own brand of hostile takeover of the eastern Mediterranean. By 1453, these guys had stormed into Constantinople like it was a board meeting they weren't invited to, effectively ending the Byzantine Empire. The Ottomans now controlled the choke points between Europe and Asia, wielding their new geopolitical power like a sledgehammer. They jacked up the taxes on overland trade, making the Silk Road about as appealing as a toll road with golden potholes. If you think modern shipping costs are steep, try telling that to a 15th century trader who just saw his profit margin evaporate faster than morning dew. Around the same time, the age of exploration was gearing up, with European powers like Portugal and Spain realizing there was more than one way to skin a cat, or in this case, get to China. Maritime trade routes were the new kids on the block, promising a direct, albeit longer, path to the riches of the East without the need to deal with grumpy Ottoman customs officials. Vasco da Gama's historic sea voyage to India in 1498 marked a turning point. The Silk Road was suddenly the dial-up internet in a world that had just discovered fiber optics. The sea lanes offered a more efficient way to move goods, making the overland route feel like yesterday's news. These maritime routes weren't just a flash in the pan. They were economic game changers. Take the Portuguese, who set up trading posts along the coastlines of Africa and India, eventually monopolizing the spice trade that once trickled through the Silk Road. This was the 15th century version of Amazon Prime, quicker and more reliable. By the 16th century, European ships were hauling back spices, silk, and other exotic goods in quantities that would have made a Silk Road caravan look like a single donkey hauling a sack of potatoes. And let's not overlook the economic shifts happening within Asia itself. The Ming Dynasty, which took over in China during the late 14th century, decided to focus inward. They paused their own maritime expeditions and turned their resources to fortifying their empire against the Mongols. This inward turn meant fewer Chinese goods flowing westward, further drying up what was once a vibrant river of commerce. The Silk Road wasn't just losing its luster, it was losing its purpose. Yet, while the Silk Road was slowly being buried under the sands of time, it wasn't all doom and gloom. The echoes of its influence lingered. European demand for Asian goods didn't vanish with the rise of the sea routes. It simply shifted focus, turning the Mediterranean into a bustling hub of trade that fed into the growing appetite for luxury goods. And let's not forget the role of the Silk Road in shaping the cultural landscapes of the regions it once connected. The intermingling of ideas and knowledge had already set the stage for the Renaissance, that glorious European cultural revival that borrowed heavily from Eastern philosophies, science, and art. It's easy to romanticize the Silk Road as a seamless tapestry of cultural exchange, but the reality was far messier, like trying to knit a sweater while riding a roller coaster. The end of this legendary route wasn't a sudden, dramatic collapse. It was a slow fade into obscurity, a victim of shifting priorities and new technologies. The Silk Road had its heyday, but like all great things, it eventually had to make way for the next big thing. And in the grand chess game of history, the Silk Road was a knight that had outlived its usefulness in a world now dominated by the rooks and queens of maritime power. But don't shed too many tears for our ancient trade route. While it may have become a dusty road less traveled, its legacy was anything but forgotten. The Silk Road had already woven its threads into the fabric of countless cultures, leaving behind a rich tapestry of languages, religions, and ideas. Its decline marked a shift in the world's economic heartbeat, but its impact continued to echo in the corridors of power, from the palaces of Europe to the temples of Asia. So, as we leave the Silk Road fading into the historical background, remember that it wasn't just a route. It was a catalyst for change, a conduit that brought the world together in ways that still resonate today. And as we look forward to the next chapter in our historical journey, let's keep our eyes open for the unexpected connections and lessons that the past has to offer. Stay tuned, because history's got plenty more twists and turns up its sleeve. As the Silk Road slips into the pages of history, its legacy unfurls like a map of hidden treasures. Each route, a vein of influence that pulses through today's global trade networks. The echoes of those ancient caravans are still heard in the modern hum of shipping containers and the digital charging of online marketplaces. While the Silk Road may not have survived the geopolitical plot twists of the 15th century, its spirit of exchange is alive and kicking, offering a masterclass in connectivity that even today's tech giants would envy. Let's talk about the myth that refuses to die. The Silk Road conjures images of exotic markets and cultural harmony, but it was more like a chaotic bazaar of human ambition, where trade was a high-stakes game with winners and losers. And yet, this romanticized vision continues to captivate us, inspiring initiatives like China's Belt and Road Project. This modern-day Silk Road aims to weave a new tapestry of trade routes across Asia, Africa, and Europe, with infrastructure projects that cost more than a few ancient treasure chests. Estimates put it at around $1 trillion. The goal? To connect economies with the precision of a Swiss watch and the ambition of a Renaissance explorer. The allure of the Silk Road isn't just about nostalgic dreams of camel caravans and distant lands. At its core, it's about the power of interconnectedness, a reminder that our world works best when ideas and goods flow freely. The ancient trade route laid the groundwork for globalization, a buzzword that now shapes everything from the price of your morning coffee to your latest streaming recommendation. In a world where a supply chain hiccup can send shockwaves through stock markets, the lessons of the Silk Road, both logistical and cultural, are more relevant than ever. Consider the economic impact. The Silk Road was capitalism before capitalism had a name, a decentralized network that allowed empires to flex their economic muscles. Fast forward to today, and the same principles apply. The global economy thrives on the exchange of goods and services, with trade agreements and tariffs acting as the modern-day toll booths. The World Trade Organization, established in 1995, is like the grandchild of the Silk Road, overseeing international trade with rules that echo the ancient pacts between empires and city-states. The numbers are staggering. As of 2021, global trade in goods was valued at approximately $19 trillion annually, a testament to the enduring thirst for exchange. But let's not kid ourselves. Trade isn't just about dollars and cents. It's about cultural osmosis, the blending of ideas and customs that enrich societies. The Silk Road was the original melting pot, a crucible where religions, languages, and technologies intermingled like a fusion restaurant with an endless menu. Today, cultural exchanges continue to flourish, from the spread of pop culture phenomena, think K-pop and Hollywood blockbusters, to the global reach of cuisines that were once regional secrets. Sriracha, sushi, and spaghetti are as much a part of the global palate as they are icons of cultural exchange. Yet, the myth of a harmonious Silk Road overshadows its grittier truths. The conflicts, the plagues, the power struggles. It's a reminder that progress often comes with a messy price tag. The Black Death, which hitchhiked along the trade routes, decimated populations, but also led to societal shifts, like the rise of a labor market that valued worker rights, an unintended silver lining. Today, as we grapple with global challenges like pandemics and climate change, the Silk Road's history offers a cautionary tale about the double-edged sword of connectivity. In this tangled web of history, let's not forget the role of individuals, the unsung heroes who navigated the Silk Road's perilous paths. Merchants, monks, and mercenaries each played a part in a drama that stretched across centuries. Their stories are the threads that wove the Silk Road's rich fabric, a reminder that history isn't just about grand empires, but also the everyday people who dared to dream beyond their horizons. It was these intrepid souls who sparked the exchanges that continue to shape our world, proving that the spirit of the Silk Road lives on in every entrepreneur and explorer who dares to bridge the gaps between cultures. So, as we close the book on this epic journey, let's carry forward the lessons of the Silk Road. It wasn't just a road, it was a bridge, a bridge between cultures, economies, and ideas. In an age where divisions often seem insurmountable, the Silk Road's legacy is a powerful reminder of what can be achieved when we look beyond borders and embrace the richness of our interconnected world. It's a history lesson with a modern twist, offering not just a glimpse into the past, but a roadmap for a future where exchange, whether of ideas, goods, or cultures, is the thread that binds us all together. The Byzantine Empire was like that one friend who seems to have everything under control, but is actually juggling flaming swords behind the scenes. In the early days, it was a curious mix of old-school Roman discipline and a dash of Eastern exoticism, kind of like a toga party with a belly dancing troupe. When the Western Roman Empire was gasping its last, like a marathon runner who forgot to train, the Byzantine Empire was busy setting up a new military playbook that would keep it in the game for a cool 1,000 years. Yep, that's a millennium of dodging and weaving in the geopolitical boxing ring. The fall of Rome in 476 AD wasn't exactly a surprise party. The Western Roman Empire had been crumbling like a stale cookie for decades. Barbarian invasions, internal strife, and economic woes were the trifecta of doom. While Rome was busy playing host to a series of inept emperors, the eastern part, what we call the Byzantine Empire, was stepping into the limelight like an understudy, finally getting their big break. Constantinople became the new power center, and boy, did they have plans. You see, the Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantium, was in a bit of a Goldilocks zone. Geographically, it had the luxury of sitting smack dab between Europe and Asia, enjoying the best of both worlds without the nasty hangover of Rome's political drama. This was an empire that knew how to multitask. They could fight wars with swords and treaties with pens, often at the same time. Their military strategy was as much about psychological warfare and diplomacy as it was about swinging swords and shooting arrows. The Byzantine military was a curious beast. Calling it a Roman army is like calling a smartphone a rotary phone because it can still make calls. Sure, they had their roots in Roman military tradition, but they evolved into something quite different. They had to. The kind of warfare they faced was a mix of classical battles and guerrilla tactics, and they needed a military as flexible as a Cirque du Soleil performer. One of their most famous tactics was the use of Greek fire, a kind of ancient napalm that could turn enemy ships into floating bonfires. Picture this: a Byzantine ship sailing up to an enemy fleet, shooting jets of flaming liquid that clung to water like oil to a frying pan. It was the medieval equivalent of having a dragon on your side. This fearsome weapon wasn't just about destruction, it was about deterrence. Enemies thought twice about engaging the Byzantine navy, knowing they could end up in a scene straight out of Dante's Inferno. But let's not get too caught up in the pyrotechnics. The Byzantines were also masters of the long game. They knew that sometimes the best way to win a war was to not fight it at all. Diplomacy was their secret weapon, wielded with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. They were experts at playing one enemy off another, making alliances as casually as someone collecting Facebook friends. The Byzantine Empire was the original keep your friends close and your enemies closer strategist. Now, let's talk about the not really Roman army. These guys weren't the centurions of your childhood history books, marching in perfect unison with shiny helmets and red capes. Instead, they were a motley crew of different cultures and fighting styles. By the 6th century, the Byzantine army was a blend of native troops, mercenaries from all corners of the known world, and even former enemies who decided they fancied a career change. Their tactics reflected this diversity, incorporating elements from Hunnic horse archers to Persian cavalry. This eclectic mix wasn't just a matter of taste, it was a necessity. The Byzantine Empire was surrounded by potential adversaries, like a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. From the Persians to the Slavs, the Avars to the Arabs, each brought their own unique brand of chaos to the party. The Byzantines had to be adaptable, and boy, did they adapt. The strategies were like a buffet of military options, choosing the best dish for each occasion. Speaking of adaptability, let's not forget about the economy. The Byzantine Empire was savvy in its wealth management, understanding that a well-fed and well-paid army fights better than one that's perpetually hangry. They were meticulous in their organization, ensuring that their troops had the resources they needed, whether it was armor, weapons, or those all-important paychecks. A soldier's loyalty was often tied to their pocketbook, after all. In these early days, the Byzantine Empire was riding the playbook on how to survive in a world where the only constant was change. They were the original strategists, the 4D chess players of their time, always thinking several moves ahead. While the Western Empire fizzled out, Byzantium was just getting started, setting the stage for centuries of intrigue, conflict, and yes, more flaming ships. So, as we delve deeper into this story, remember, the Byzantine military wasn't just about swords and shields. It was about creating a legacy that would outlast empires and echo through the halls of history. Now, let's hop on our metaphorical time machine and fast forward to the 6th century, where we find ourselves in the midst of the golden age of Byzantine military prowess under the reign of Justinian I. This was the time when conquests were as trendy as the latest iPhone release, and everybody wanted a piece of the action, or at least a piece of the Byzantine pie. Justinian I, who reigned from 527 to 565 AD, was the kind of emperor who didn't just dream big. He dreamed in technicolor. He had a vision of a reunited Roman Empire, and he wasn't about to let a little thing like the fall of the Western Roman Empire stop him. Imagine a man with the determination of a marathon runner and the ambition of a tech startup founder. Justinian was all about expansion, and his conquests spanned across North Africa, Italy, and parts of Spain. His reign was a period of aggressive military campaigns and strategic brilliance, or, depending on who you ask, a series of costly wars with mixed results. Now, how did Justinian pull this off? Well, he had a secret weapon in his corner, a general named Belisarius. If Justinian was the visionary CEO, then Belisarius was his rock star COO, executing plans with finesse. Belisarius was one of the most brilliant military minds of his time, and his strategies were a masterclass in adaptability. Under his command, the Byzantine army perfected its infantry tactics, turning foot soldiers into the backbone of their military machine. Think of them as the special forces of their day, capable of rapid maneuvers and holding their ground like seasoned pros. The Byzantine infantry was a well-oiled machine, and their tactics were as precise as a Swiss watch. They used a combination of heavy infantry and light skirmishers, creating a balance that allowed them to adapt to different battle scenarios. The heavy infantry, known as the Scudarii, wielded large shields and spears, forming a formidable wall of defense. Meanwhile, the lighter troops, the Siloi, harassed the enemy with javelins and arrows, creating chaos before the main assault. This blend of heavy and light infantry was a game changer, allowing the Byzantines to face off against a variety of foes, from the Vandals in North Africa to the Ostrogoths in Italy. But let's not forget the role of everyone's favorite tool, money. Justinian knew that sometimes the best way to win a battle was to not have one at all. Enter checkbook diplomacy, the art of bribery elevated to a fine craft. The Byzantines were experts at using gold as a tool of persuasion, making it rain before it was cool. They knew that in the right hands, or the right pockets, gold could be more effective than swords. This approach was not just about avoiding unnecessary bloodshed. It was about conserving resources. Wars are expensive, and the Byzantine Empire was nothing if not fiscally savvy. They understood that an empire's strength was tied to its economic health, and they weren't about to bankrupt themselves on endless campaigns. By using their treasury to buy peace or favorable alliances, they ensured that their coffers didn't run dry. This strategy allowed them to maintain a strong military presence without overextending their resources. Of course, not every venture was a smashing success. Justinian's ambition sometimes led to overreach, and his campaigns often drained the empire's resources to the brink. The infamous Nika riots of 532 AD, for instance, were partly fueled by the heavy taxation needed to fund his military endeavors. Picture this: a chariot race in Constantinople going from entertainment to chaos, with the crowd's chants turning from cheers to jeers, and then to outright rebellion. It was a classic case of biting off more than you can chew, and it took all of Justinian's cunning and a bit of luck to quell the uprising. But hey, even the best-laid plans can go awry, right? Despite the setbacks, Justinian's reign marked a high point in Byzantine military history. His campaigns, though costly, expanded the empire's reach and influence. The Byzantine army emerged as a versatile force, capable of both conquest and defense, thanks to its combination of tactical prowess and strategic diplomacy. Yet, as with any empire, the glory days under Justinian also sowed the seeds for future challenges. The constant warfare, coupled with natural disasters like the plague of 541 AD, strained the empire's resources and manpower. The so-called plague of Justinian was a pandemic that swept through the empire like a medieval hurricane, decimating populations and leaving a trail of economic and social upheaval in its wake. It was a stark reminder that even the mightiest empires are vulnerable to forces beyond their control. In the end, Justinian's reign was a testament to the complexities of power, how it can be both a gift and a burden. His ambitions reshaped the Byzantine Empire, but they also highlighted the delicate balance between expansion and sustainability. It was a lesson in the art of empire building, one that would echo through the corridors of history long after his time. So, as we continue this journey through Byzantine military history, remember that it wasn't just about battles and conquests. It was about strategy, adaptability, and yes, a bit of good old-fashioned bribery. Justinian's era was a golden age, but like all things golden, it came with its own set of challenges and contradictions. A perfect blend of romance and reality, if you will. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the Byzantine saga, exploring the shifting tides of power that would shape the empire's destiny. As we sail further into the Byzantine saga, let's drop anchor in the choppy waters of the Byzantine navy, a force that was as formidable as it was mysterious. Imagine, if you will, time when the Mediterranean was the world's busiest highway, crammed with merchants, pirates, and imperial fleets all jostling for dominance. The Byzantine navy was the empire's maritime muscle, its floating fortress standing sentinel over crucial trade routes and coastal cities. These ships weren't just vessels, they were the empire's front line, and they came equipped with a secret weapon that could turn the tide of battle faster than you can say, fire in the hole. Enter Greek fire, the ancient equivalent of an action movie explosion, only without the CGI. This wasn't just fire. It was a hellish concoction that could continue burning even on water, making it the ultimate maritime deterrent. Think of it as the medieval version of napalm, if napalm were the love child of a chemistry set and a dragon's breath. The Byzantines wielded Greek fire like a magician's wand, conjuring flames that could engulf enemy ships and send entire fleets scuttling for safety like startled cats. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly was Greek fire? Well, here's the kicker. Nobody really knows. The recipe was a state secret so closely guarded that it makes the formula for Coca-Cola look like an open-source project. Passed down through generations of Byzantine chemists, the exact ingredients and method of production were known only to a select few. Historians have speculated that the concoction included ingredients like resin, naphtha, quicklime, and sulfur, but without a definitive recipe, it remains one of history's most tantalizing mysteries. It's like the medieval version of a tantalizing cliffhanger, leaving historians and chemists alike scratching their heads. But Greek fire was more than just a weapon. It was psychological warfare at its finest. The mere threat of facing this terrifying substance was enough to make even the most battle-hardened opponents think twice. Picture enemy commanders huddled on their decks, dreading the sight of a Byzantine drahman on the horizon, its prow armed with siphons ready to spew fiery destruction. The Byzantines knew that sometimes the best way to win a battle was to make sure it never got started in the first place. The legend of Greek fire spread far and wide, ensuring that the Byzantine navy's reputation burned even brighter than its weapons. Yet, for all its fiery glory, the Byzantine navy wasn't just about pyrotechnics. It was a well-oiled machine, strategically designed to protect the empire's extensive coastline and vital trade routes. At its height, the navy boasted hundreds of ships, from swift drahmans to sturdy Chelandia, capable of deploying troops directly onto enemy shores. These vessels were the workhorses of the Mediterranean, tirelessly patrolling the waters and projecting Byzantine power far beyond the empire's borders. And let's not forget the economic clout this naval prowess brought. Control of the sea lanes meant control of trade, and with it, a steady flow of wealth into the imperial coffers. Commerce was the lifeblood of Byzantium, and the navy was its pulse, ensuring that gold and goods continued to flow even in times of conflict. In the grand tapestry of Byzantine history, the navy was both a shield and a sword, defending the empire from seaborne threats while enabling it to launch its own maritime campaigns. The strategic genius of Byzantine naval commanders lay not just in their ability to wield Greek fire, but in their understanding of the broader geopolitical chessboard. They knew that the Mediterranean was a game of cat and mouse, where the stakes were nothing less than the survival of the empire itself. Their ships were the pieces, their tactics the moves, and the sea their board. Economic context played a crucial role in shaping the navy's fortunes. Maintaining a fleet was no small feat, and the Byzantine emperors knew that a well-funded navy was essential for both defense and deterrence. The empire's wealth was its lifeblood, and the navy its lifeline. Without control of the seas, the Byzantine economy would have been as vulnerable as a ship without a rudder, adrift, and at the mercy of hostile winds. The navy's success was a testament to the empire's ability to adapt and innovate, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Yet, like all good stories, the tale of the Byzantine navy is one of both triumph and tragedy. The reliance on Greek fire, while a stroke of genius, also highlighted a vulnerability. What if the secret got out? A single act of treachery or a well-placed spy could have turned the tide against the Byzantines, turning their greatest weapon into a double-edged sword. It's a reminder that in the high-stakes game of empire, even the most closely guarded secrets can be a liability as much as an asset. In the end, the Byzantine navy's legacy is one of innovation, adaptation, and strategic brilliance. It was a force that shaped the destiny of an empire, ensuring its survival in a world where the only constant was change. But as we'll see in the next part of our journey, the Byzantine military story doesn't end with the navy. There's a whole new chapter to explore, filled with intrigue, innovation, and the ever-present shadow of conflict. So, hold onto your hats, because the Byzantine saga is far from over. The adventure continues, with more secrets to uncover and more myths to debunk. Stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. When it comes to Byzantine military innovation, the cataphracts were the empire's piece de resistance. Imagine a cavalry unit so heavily armored that it resembled a medieval tank, thundering across battlefields more than 1,000 years before the first mechanized behemoth ever rolled out. These horsemen were the embodiment of Byzantine flair and functionality, a testament to the empire's knack for blending art and warfare. But before we get too swept up in the romance of these ironclad knights, let's dive into the nuts and bolts, or should I say, the spears and chainmail of what made them tick. The term cataphract comes from the Greek kataphractos, which means completely armored. And boy, they weren't kidding. These warriors were the full metal jacket of their time, sporting chainmail that covered both horse and rider. Picture a knight in shining armor, only double the shine, and add a horse that looks like it just walked off a Renaissance fair runway. This wasn't just about looking good. The heavy armor provided crucial protection against arrows and other projectiles that would have turned lesser cavalrymen into medieval pincushions. But it wasn't all glamour and glitz. The practical realities of fielding such heavily armored units were immense. The cost of equipping a single cataphract was astronomical, requiring substantial investment from the Byzantine treasury. In today's terms, think of it as the defense budget equivalent of buying a fleet of luxury cars. And it wasn't just about the initial purchase. Maintaining these units was no small feat. Horses needed to be fed, armor needed to be repaired, and soldiers needed to be paid. Each cataphract was a walking, or rather, galloping, testament to the empire's wealth and military prowess. So how did these armored behemoths change the game? Well, their impact on battle tactics was nothing short of revolutionary. Before the cataphracts, cavalry units were primarily used for flanking maneuvers and chasing down retreating enemies. But the Byzantines had different plans. They turned these units into the spearhead of their attacks, using their sheer weight and momentum to break enemy lines like a battering ram through a wooden door. The psychological impact was just as powerful. Facing a charge of cataphracts was akin to standing on the tracks as a freight train bore down on you. It took a brave, or foolish, soul to stand firm against such a sight. Yet, with great power comes great responsibility, or at least great logistical challenges. The terrain played a crucial role in the effectiveness of cataphracts. On open plains, they were unstoppable. But in rough or mountainous terrain, their usefulness diminished faster than a smartphone battery at a music festival. The Byzantines had to be strategic in deploying their prized cavalry, picking battles that played to their strengths. It was a classic case of knowing when to hold M and when to fold M, with the stakes being nothing less than the survival of the empire. Speaking of stakes, the Byzantines didn't just rely on brute force. As with all things Byzantine, there was a keen understanding of the economic and political contexts that shaped military decisions. The deployment of cataphracts was often as much about prestige as it was about practicality. By fielding these fearsome units, the Byzantines sent a clear message to both friends and foes. This was an empire that meant business. It was a show of strength that doubled as a diplomatic tool, ensuring that negotiations started with the empire in the driver's seat, or rather, the saddle. But like any good story, there's more to the tale of the cataphracts than meets the eye. While their legend endures, the reality was often less glamorous. For one, the weight of the armor restricted mobility, slowing the cavalry down and making it difficult to adapt to changing battlefield conditions. And as warfare evolved, so too did the means to counter these medieval tanks. The rise of more mobile, lightly armored troops, akin to guerrilla fighters, posed a significant threat, forcing the Byzantines to continuously adapt their tactics to stay ahead of the curve. In the grand tapestry of Byzantine history, the cataphracts were both a symbol of the empire's might and a reflection of its challenges. They encapsulated the Byzantine spirit of innovation, blending technology and tactics in a way that left a lasting impact on military history. Yet they also highlighted the limits of empire, the constant need to adapt, to innovate, and to balance strength with strategy. It's a story as old as time, one that resonates even today, a reminder that in the world of geopolitics, the only constant is change. As we journey further into the Byzantine saga, remember that the story of these armored cavalry units is but one chapter in a much larger narrative. The Byzantine Empire was a living, breathing organism, constantly evolving and adapting to the ever-shifting sands of time. And just as the cataphracts galloped across the battlefields of history, so too does the tale of Byzantium continue to unfold, full of intrigue, innovation, and the ever-present specter of conflict. So stay tuned, because the ride isn't over yet. There's more to discover in the Byzantine Chronicle, and trust me, you won't want to miss a moment. And so we find ourselves at the twilight of an empire that once danced gracefully between the twin poles of diplomacy and warfare, like a seasoned tightrope walker who finally begins to wobble. The Byzantine Empire, once the heavyweight champion of medieval geopolitics, started to feel the rougher edges of time, as the very forces it had deftly manipulated threatened to unravel it. By the turn of the first millennium, the Byzantine military might was more like a faded rock star trying to hang on to its glory days. The empire was losing its mojo, and not for lack of trying. The economic underpinnings that had long supported its military endeavors were cracking under the weight of continuous warfare and political intrigue. Picture a once bustling treasury now echoing with the sound of empty coffers. The Byzantine economy was like a vintage car engine, still running, but with an ominous rattle suggesting it might conk out any minute. Economic woes were just the opening act in this tragic play. The Seljuk Turks, like an unexpected plot twist, began encroaching on Byzantine territory, and the infamous Battle of Manzikert in 1071 was a jaw-dropping scene. Here, the Byzantine forces, once thought invincible, were decisively defeated, losing most of Anatolia, an area as crucial to them as Wi-Fi is to the modern traveler. This wasn't just a military loss, it was a seismic shift that triggered a series of aftershocks throughout the empire. As if a military defeat wasn't enough, the internal strife within the Byzantine leadership was a high-stakes game of thrones, minus the dragons, but with similar levels of betrayal and backstabbing. Various factions fought for control, each one more concerned with personal power than the empire's long-term stability. It was a political circus without a ringmaster, and each act only added to the chaos. And yet, despite the turmoil, the Byzantine Empire still managed to pull some rabbits out of its hat. Its legendary diplomacy remained a formidable tool, allowing it to play its enemies against each other like a master puppeteer. But here's the kicker. The Byzantine knack for diplomacy was also a double-edged sword. The empire's reliance on political maneuvering sometimes meant that when a military response was needed, the resources simply weren't there. It was like trying to win a chess match with only pawns left on the board. By the late 11th century, the Byzantine Empire was like an aging boxer, still able to land a punch, but increasingly taking hits it couldn't absorb. The Crusades, initially seen as a potential boon, turned out to be more of a mixed blessing. The Fourth Crusade in 1204, ostensibly aimed at the Holy Land, detoured to Constantinople instead. The resulting sack was a devastating blow, akin to Vandals trashing a priceless art gallery. Constantinople was looted, its treasures carted off, and the empire's prestige took a nosedive. The post-Crusade era saw the Byzantine Empire fractured like a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces. It splintered into smaller states, each trying to claim legitimacy as the true continuation of the Byzantine legacy. The Empire of Nicaea, the Despotate of Epirus, and the Empire of Trebizond all vied for recognition, but none could fully reclaim the former glory of Byzantium. It was as if the once mighty empire had become a series of spin-off shows that just couldn't capture the magic of the original. By the time the 15th century rolled around, the Byzantine Empire was but a shadow of its former self, reduced to little more than Constantinople and a few surrounding territories. The Ottomans, having risen like a phoenix from the ashes of the Seljuk Turks, were poised to deliver the final blow. In 1453, Constantine Roman XI, the last Byzantine emperor, stood against the Ottoman forces in a final, doomed defense. The fall of Constantinople was like the closing curtain on a play that had run for over 1,000 years. So, what can we glean from this grand tapestry of rise and fall? The Byzantine Empire was a masterclass in adaptability and resilience, yet it also serves as a cautionary tale about the perils of over-reliance on both military might and diplomatic cunning. Its story is a reminder that empires, like people, are complex creatures, capable of incredible feats, but also susceptible to the same flaws and failures. The Byzantine military strategies, with their blend of innovation and tradition, still echo in modern tactics. From the clever use of psychological warfare to the strategic deployment of resources, Byzantium's legacy is like a ghost still whispering in the corridors of military academies worldwide. The balance between hard power and soft power, the art of warfare and the craft of diplomacy, these are lessons as relevant today as they were a millennium ago. In the end, the Byzantine Empire was more than just a historical footnote. It was a grand saga of ambition, ingenuity, and human frailty. Its story is a testament to the enduring power of history to teach us not just about the past, but about ourselves. As we leave the Byzantine chronicles behind, let's carry forward the lessons learned from an empire that was, for so long, the light of the medieval world. And who knows, perhaps in some small way, Byzantium still dances on, in the strategies and stories that continue to shape our world. In the beginning, there was Dionysus, the Greek god who could throw a party like no other deity. Imagine a divine mixologist who not only served ambrosia, but also had a flair for dramatic storytelling. That's the kind of vibe Dionysus brought to the table, or altar, as it were. Greek theater, surprisingly enough, owes its origins to this wine-loving god. It all started around 534 BCE, during the city Dionysia festival in Athens, where folks gathered to honor Dionysus with copious amounts of wine, ecstatic dancing, and eventually the birth of theater as we know it. The early Greeks weren't just about pondering life's big questions over a glass of homemade vintage. They were also keen on exploring these existential dilemmas through performance. You could say they were the original drama kings and queens. The first performances weren't exactly what you'd call theatrical masterpieces. Picture this: chorus members chanting dithyrambs. Those are hymns, not some forgotten ancient snack, while dressed in goat skins. Yes, goat skins, because nothing says serious religious ritual quite like a bit of animal hide. Now, let's talk about Thespes, our protagonist in this tale of theatrical genesis. According to the historical grapevine, around 534 BCE, Thespes stepped out of the chorus line and onto the stage, effectively becoming the world's first actor. He dared to speak solo, portraying a character separate from himself, an act so revolutionary it could have been the ancient equivalent of a mic drop. Hence, The term thespian was coined, forever linking his name with the world of actors. Sure, there's some scholarly debate about whether Thespes was truly the first, but why let facts ruin a perfectly good story? As theatre evolved, it began to move away from its purely religious beginnings, becoming a staple of Athenian social life. The city Dionysia was no longer just a festival. It became a competitive arena where playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides duked it out for top honors. Picture the Oscars with togas and a lot more philosophical musing. By 500 BCE, theatre had firmly rooted itself as a civic institution. The Greeks believed in the power of drama to educate, entertain, and provoke thought, all while ensuring Dionysus got his due reverence. While the festival primarily honored the gods, it also served as a platform for political commentary. The plays often tackled themes like justice, power, and the human condition, cleverly disguised in mythological garb. Aristophanes, the comedic heavyweight of the time, used his plays to critique everything from war to social norms, wielding satire like a sculptor with a chisel. Audiences lapped it up, whether they were laughing at the absurdity of politics or crying over a tragic hero's fate. In this burgeoning theatrical world, the practical realities were as compelling as the performances themselves. The theatre of Dionysus in Athens, for instance, could seat up to 17,000 spectators. That's like cramming an entire small town into an amphitheater. The seats were arranged in a semicircle around the stage, ensuring that everyone, from the lowliest citizen to the wealthiest aristocrat, could have a decent view of the action. It was a democratic setup in a society that, let's be honest, wasn't exactly known for equality across the board. The economic engine of Greek theatre was fueled by wealthy patrons who sponsored productions as a form of liturgy, a public service that doubled as a status symbol. These benefactors, or choregoi, funded everything from the actors' salaries to the elaborate costumes, which were essential for transforming mere mortals into gods and monsters. In return, they received glory, honor, and the occasional laurel wreath, because who doesn't want eternal fame for sponsoring a killer performance? It's worth noting that the Greeks didn't just wake up one day and invent theater out of thin air. There were plenty of cultural exchanges happening in the Mediterranean world. The Greeks borrowed heavily from their neighbors. The Mesopotamians, Egyptians, and even the Minoans had their own forms of ritualistic performances. It's a classic case of cultural appropriation, ancient style. But it was the Greeks who took these influences and in true Dionysian fashion ran with them to create something uniquely their own. As Greek theatre grew, so did its complexity and scale. Special effects, like the Deus Ex Machina, became part of the repertoire. This wasn't just some fancy Latin term. It was a literal machine, usually a crane, that hoisted actors playing guards onto the stage, resolving plot conflicts in a divine swoop. It's the ancient equivalent of a last-minute plot twist that's a little too convenient. But hey, it looked impressive. In conclusion, the origins of Greek theatre are a testament to humanity's enduring love affair with storytelling and spectacle. From the ritualistic chants in honor of Dionysus to the dramatic masterpieces that grace the Athenian stage, it's a story of evolution, creativity, and of course, a bit of divine intervention. So, next time you find yourself at a theater, sipping overpriced wine and pondering the complexities of the human condition, raise a glass to Dionysus and his merry band of ancient thespians. Because if there's one thing the Greeks knew, it's that life is one big, dramatic performance, and we're all just playing our parts. So, speaking of playing our parts, let's waltz into the heart of the action, an ancient Greek theater performance. Picture yourself in the ancient city of Athens, circa 400 BCE, where attending the theater was less about popcorn and more about philosophy, politics, and a full-blown cultural experience. The theater of Dionysus, nestled on the southern slopes of the Acropolis, was the epicenter of this spectacle, with a jaw-dropping capacity of up to 17,000 seats. That's like packing the population of a small modern suburb into one venue, without the hassle of Ticketmaster fees, but with plenty more goat-related attire. Let's talk seating arrangements, or as I like to call it, the ancient game of who sits where. The Greeks, being the pioneers of democracy, ensured that everyone had a shot at a decent view. However, social hierarchy was still a thing. The front rows, prime real estate, were reserved for VIPs, priests, political bigwigs, and benefactors. Imagine the red carpet at the Oscars, but with more toga and less Versace. The rest of the crowd, well, they got what you might call stadium seating, a free-for-all where the early bird got the worm, or at least a better view of the Deus Ex Machina swinging into action. The amphitheater's semicircular design, cleverly built into the hillside, wasn't just about aesthetics. It was an ancient acoustical marvel, allowing actors' voices to carry all the way to the back without a single microphone in sight. Try pulling that off in today's echo-prone concert halls. Now, let's dive into the logistics of staging these grand productions. It's a bit like trying to organize a wedding, a political rally, and a rock concert all at once. First up, the playwrights. Think of them as the ancient screenwriters, had to compete for the privilege of having their works performed. Winning this honor was akin to scoring an Olympic gold medal, albeit with less physical exertion and more iambic pentameter. Once a play was selected, enter the chorgos, the ancient equivalent of a Broadway producer. These wealthy individuals footed the bill for the entire production, from the actors' salaries to the elaborate costumes and masks. Think of it as a philanthropy/status symbol, like sponsoring a modern art exhibit, but with more drama and fewer canapes. The cost of a single production could be astronomical, sometimes amounting to a year's worth of a laborer's wages. But for the chorgos, the potential for glory and political clout made it all worthwhile. After all, nothing screams power player quite like funding a tragic masterpiece. Speaking of funding, let's not forget the economic engine driving this theatrical juggernaut. The City Dionysia Festival wasn't just a cultural extravaganza. It was an economic boon for Athens. Influx of visitors boosted local commerce, from taverns and inns to vendors selling everything from snacks to souvenirs. Picture a bustling Greek version of Times Square during New Year's Eve, but with fewer selfies and more philosophical debates. The financial stakes were high, but so was the competition. Playwrights and actors alike were vying for the coveted prize. Think of it as their version of an Oscar, but with more laurel wreaths and fewer teary acceptance speeches. The judges, chosen by lot to prevent bias, wielded significant power. Their decisions could catapult a playwright to fame or banish them to the annals of obscurity. It was a high-risk, high-reward scenario, much like today's entertainment industry, minus the paparazzi. But what about the audience? They were a lively bunch, not unlike today's sports fans. Booing, cheering, and catcalling were all part of the experience. If a play flopped, the crowd wasn't shy about expressing their displeasure. This wasn't just a passive viewing experience. It was interactive, with the audience playing a crucial role in the unfolding drama. In that way, they were the original critics, long before Rotten Tomatoes started aggregating opinions. In essence, a day at the theater was a communal affair, where the boundaries between performer and spectator blurred. It was a microcosm of Athenian society, a space where ideas were exchanged, politics debated, and culture celebrated. And while the plays themselves often centered on mythological themes, they were deeply rooted in the issues of the day, making them as relevant to their audiences as today's headlines. So, next time you're at a live performance, soaking in the atmosphere and losing yourself in the story, remember the ancient Greeks. They may have lacked modern technology, but they understood the power of theater to captivate, challenge, and change us. They laid the groundwork for the dramatic arts, creating a legacy that continues to influence us today. And as you sit there, surrounded by the hum of anticipation, raise an imaginary glass to those ancient pioneers of drama who knew that sometimes all the world's a stage, and we're just the players strutting our stuff. And speaking of the original players strutting their stuff, let's turn the spotlight onto the heart of Greek theater, the content of those legendary performances. Forget about the popcorn flicks of today. These plays were the blockbusters of their time, tackling themes that were as vast as the Aegean Sea. From divine meddling to family feuds that would make a soap opera blush, Greek theater was the original drama generator. Let's start with the heavyweights, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. These guys were the Spielberg, Scorsese, and Tarantino of ancient Greece, churning out masterpieces that still resonate today. Aeschylus, often dubbed the father of tragedy, didn't just write plays, he elevated them. Before him, a typical play might have felt like a solo act, but Aeschylus introduced the concept of a second actor. This turned dialogues into dynamic exchanges and added layers of complexity to the narrative. His works, like the austere trilogy, explored themes of justice and vengeance with a side of divine retribution. Imagine the legal drama of Law and Order, but with more guards and less gavel pounding. Moving on to Sophocles, the master of tragic irony, whose most famous work, Oedipus Rex, is the original plot twist. Sophocles took Aeschylus's innovations and added a third actor, creating a richer tapestry of human interaction. His plays often delved into the tragic flaws of humanity, exploring how fate and free will collide in a tragic dance. Sophocles was the guy who made you question whether knowing your future is a blessing or a curse, a question as relevant now as it was 500 years ago. Then there's Euripides, the rebel with a cause. Known for his psychological depth and skepticism of traditional values, Euripides was like the edgy indie filmmaker of his time. His plays, like Medea and the Bacchae, weren't afraid to challenge societal norms, portraying strong, complex women and questioning the morality of the gods. Euripides was the guy who pointed out that sometimes the gods were just as flawed as the humans they toyed with. It's like calling out the plot holes in your favorite superhero movie, bold and a bit risky. Now, while the playwrights were crafting these narrative gems, let's not forget the chorus, a key player in Greek theater. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of a Greek chorus in a modern musical, but with a much more serious job description. They weren't just there to sing catchy tunes. They provided commentary, context, and sometimes even comedic relief. The chorus was the bridge between the audience and the actors, guiding viewers through the narrative labyrinth. They were the original narrators, a bit like Morgan Freeman's voiceovers, but with a lot more chanting. But let's get real about the practical side of things. Those elaborate masks and costumes weren't just for show. They were essential to the art form. Masks helped amplify voices and allowed actors to switch roles seamlessly, an important feature when your cast is a bit short on numbers. They also depicted age, gender, and social status. Basically, the ancient equivalent of a character's Instagram bio. And speaking of costumes, let's debunk the romantic notion of actors gracefully strutting the stage. Those robes and masks were heavy, hard, and probably smelled like a gym bag left in the sun. Imagine performing an intense emotional scene while wearing a sauna suit and a mask that limits your vision. It was no easy feat. The physical demands of acting in the Mediterranean heat were akin to running a marathon while delivering a Shakespearean monologue. No small task, even for the most seasoned thespian. These performances weren't just about entertainment. They were a reflection of Athenian society and its values. They grappled with issues of morality, politics, and the human condition, often using mythological stories as a vehicle to explore contemporary issues. It's like using a fairy tale to critique modern-day politics, subtle yet powerful. But here's a little secret. Not every play was a hit, and not every actor was a star. Some performances flopped like a fish out of water, and actors sometimes struggled with the demanding roles. The path to theatrical glory was paved with challenges, from the unforgiving sun to the critical eyes of an Athenian audience ready to boo you off the stage. In essence, Greek theater was a microcosm of life's drama, an ancient mirror reflecting the triumphs and tragedies of the human experience. The playwrights, actors, and audiences were all part of this grand performance, each playing their part in a narrative that continues to influence us today. The themes they explored, the innovations they introduced, and the stories they told laid the foundation for the dramatic arts as we know them. As we wrap up this deep dive into the themes and realities of Greek theater, remember that these stories were not just entertainment, but a lens through which to view the world. Whether it was a tale of divine intervention or a cautionary family drama, each play offered a chance to reflect, critique, and perhaps learn a little something about ourselves. And isn't that what great theater is all about? Stay tuned as we continue our journey into the ancient world of drama, where more insights and surprises await. So, as we delve further into the theatrical whirlpool of ancient Greece, let's talk about how these plays were the Twitter of their time, except with more chorus lines and fewer hashtags. Greek theater wasn't just a cultural pastime. It was a full-blown social and political commentary, complete with all the satire, irony, and biting critique you'd expect from your favorite late-night show. Imagine you're an Athenian citizen in the 5th century BCE, plunked down in the theater of Dionysus, ready to be entertained and enlightened. The stage is set, the masks are on, and the air is thick with anticipation. But this isn't just about watching actors prance around in goat skins. Your ticket is also a front row seat to a vivid public debate, where playwrights like Aristophanes wielded their quills like swords, slicing through the political blunders of the day. Aristophanes, the original king of satire, was fearless. His plays were like comedic grenades lobbed into the political arena, exploding with critiques of war, corruption, and the not-so-brilliant decisions of Athens's political elite. Take Lysistrata, for instance, penned in 411 BCE. This comedy features a group of women, led by the titular character, who band together to end the Peloponnesian War by withholding certain marital privileges from their husbands. Talk about a plot twist. This play wasn't just for laughs. It was a bold statement on the futility of war, delivered with a side of humor that could make even the stone-faced guards chuckle. But Aristophanes didn't stop at war commentary. He had a way of poking fun at the philosophical elite, too. In The Clouds, he took aim at none other than Socrates himself, portraying him as an absurdly impractical thinker, floating in a basket and babbling about the heavens. It was like ancient Greek roast night, where no one, not even the wisest of the wise, was safe from a good-natured ribbing. And while Aristophanes exaggerated for comedic effect, his work reflected genuine concerns about the influence of sophists and the rise of new philosophical ideas that seemed to challenge traditional Athenian values. Let's not forget The Frogs, a play that saw Dionysus himself descend into the underworld on a quest to bring Euripides back from the dead. Through this fantastical plot, Aristophanes commented on the state of contemporary tragedy and the need for a playwright who could speak to the issues of the day. This was more than mere entertainment. It was a critique of cultural decline, wrapped in humor and served with a side of mythological whimsy. Now, you might be thinking, surely such bold plays caused a ruckus among the powers that be. And you'd be right. These theatrical commentaries did ruffle feathers. Political leaders grumbled, philosophers rolled their eyes, and yet the public lapped it up. Because beneath the jokes and jabs was a kernel of truth that resonated with the common citizen. It was a reminder that theater wasn't just about gods and heroes. It was about the people and their very real struggles. Theater was also a place where sensitive social issues could be aired. Take Euripides' Medea, which dared to tackle themes of gender and power, portraying a woman wronged by her husband with a complexity that was both terrifying and sympathetic. This wasn't just a tragic tale of betrayal. It was a commentary on the roles and expectations of women in Greek society. Medea's extreme actions may have shocked audiences, but they also forced a confrontation with uncomfortable truths about the status quo. While these plays often pushed the envelope, they also served an essential function in Athenian democracy. By offering a space for public discourse, they allowed citizens to explore and critique the very fabric of their society. In a way, the theater was an extension of the agora, the public square, where ideas were exchanged and debated. It was democracy in action, a place where free speech was not only encouraged, but celebrated. Of course, not every play was a smash hit. The Athenian audience was discerning, with little patience for dull or poorly executed performances. If a playwright failed to deliver, the audience wouldn't hesitate to pelt the stage with fruit, or worse, their scornful laughter. In this way, the theater was a proving ground, where only the most compelling stories and sharpest critiques survived. It's fascinating to see how the themes explored in these ancient plays remain relevant today. Political satire is alive and well, whether it's on the stage, in print, or online. The timeless nature of satire is its ability to cut through the noise and lay bare the absurdities of human behavior, a skill that Aristophanes and his contemporaries mastered long before the digital age. So next time you watch a modern-day satire, spare a thought for the ancient Greeks who laid the foundation for this art form. They understood that laughter was not just the best medicine, but also a powerful tool for reflection and change. As we continue our journey through the annals of Greek theater, remember that these plays were more than just ancient history. They were the start of a conversation that continues to this day. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the role of theater in shaping society and the echoes of these ancient performances in our modern world. So, As we continue our jaunt through the annals of theatre history, let's shift our gaze from the olive grove-covered hills of Greece to the marble-laden avenues of Rome. Rome, the city that saw Greek theatre and decided, let's make it bigger, louder, and with more gladiators. If Greek theatre was the thoughtful cafe debate, Roman theatre was the all-you-can-eat buffet of spectacle. The Romans, never ones to shy away from borrowing a good idea, took Greek theatrical traditions and gave them a distinctly Roman twist. They kept the masks, choruses, and even the toga-clad actors, but added a touch of their own flair. Think more chariot races and less dithyrambs. Now, the Romans loved a good comedy, and they were particularly fond of a playwright named Plautus. He was like the Mel Brooks of his day, serving up slapstick humor and fast faster than you can say Ave Imperator. Plautus was inspired by the Greek New Comedy, but gave it a Roman spin, making it more accessible to his Latin-speaking audience. His works, full of mistaken identities and clever servants, set the stage, quite literally, for what would later become staples of comedic theatre. If you've ever seen a sitcom, you've got Plautus to thank for that. But let's not forget Terence, Plautus's younger counterpart, who brought a level of sophistication to Roman comedy, blending humor with a touch of moral reflection. He was the kind of playwright who made you laugh, and then hit you with a thought-provoking nugget, like a philosopher hiding inside a jester's costume. His influence stretched far beyond the boundaries of the Roman Empire, impacting the development of comedy in the Renaissance and beyond. Now, while the Romans were busy turning Greek tragedies into grandiose spectacles, they also had a penchant for a bit of blood and gore, hence the gladiator games, and shall we say, more interactive forms of theatre. But despite this penchant for the dramatic, they never strayed too far from the roots laid by their Greek predecessors. They respected the Greek tradition of using theatre as a means of public discourse, even if their version involved a few more lions. So, why does any of this matter? Well, the legacy of Greek theatre didn't just stop at inspiring the Romans. It laid the groundwork for the entire Western canon of drama and storytelling. Shakespeare, Molière, and countless others owe a debt to those ancient playwrights who dared to put pen to papyrus. The themes they explored, power, fate, love, betrayal, are as relevant today as they were 2.5 millennia ago. And speaking of relevance, let's debunk a few myths. The so-called Golden Age of Greek theatre wasn't all sunshine and roses. Sure, Athens was a cultural hub, a beacon of democracy and intellectual thought, but it was also a society deeply divided by class and marked by political strife. The theatre was both an escape from and a reflection of these tensions. The plays were not just cultural artifacts, they were commentaries on the very fabric of Athenian life, critiquing the follies and failures of its leaders and citizens alike. But here's the thing. The romanticized image of the Greek theatre as a bastion of intellectual enlightenment persists because it speaks to a universal truth, the power of storytelling to transcend time and place. The Greeks got a lot right. They understood that a good story could entertain and educate, provoke thought, and spark debate. It was a tool for democracy, a platform for free speech long before social media turned us into keyboard warriors. And let's not forget the economic angle. Theatre was big business in ancient Greece. Those performances weren't just for the love of the art. They were part of a thriving economy that relied on tourism and civic pride. The city Dionysia wasn't just a festival. It was a financial boon for Athens, drawing spectators and critics from across the Aegean. The economic realities of theatre production then are not so different from today. Wealthy patrons, government sponsorships, and the ever-present need to sell tickets. Fast forward to the present, and the shadows of Greek theatre loom large. From Broadway to Hollywood, the echoes of those ancient amphitheaters can still be heard. Modern playwrights, filmmakers, and even political satirists continue to draw inspiration from the themes and structures laid out by their Greek predecessors. The next time you catch a play or a movie, listen closely. You might just hear the whispers of Dionysus still calling us to the stage. As we wrap up this whirlwind tour of Greek theatre's legacy, it's clear that the ancients left us more than just tales of gods and monsters. They gave us a blueprint for exploring the human condition through the lens of performance. So, as you turn off the lights and let the curtain fall on this historical journey, take a moment to appreciate the enduring power of a good story. A story that began on the sun-drenched stages of Athens and continues to be told in myriad ways, across the world today. In the bustling markets of medieval northern Europe, where the aroma of salted fish and the clatter of merchant carts painted the soundtrack of daily life, a quiet revolution was brewing. You see, back in the day, the North Sea and the Baltic Sea weren't just water bodies. They were highways of commerce, teeming with traders on a mission to make a buck, or a guilder, if we're being period accurate. But the road, or rather the sea, wasn't smooth sailing. It was more like a gauntlet, with pirates lurking in every cove, tariffs slapped on every dock, and city-states squabbling like toddlers over a favorite toy. Enter the Hanseatic League, a medieval trade alliance that was basically the Avengers of the merchant world, except instead of Iron Man and Thor, you had Lübeck and Hamburg. These were cities that decided they were done with the medieval nuisances of piracy and arbitrary tolls. They banded together to create a formidable economic powerhouse that would dominate trade for centuries. And honestly, who could blame them? When your livelihood depends on getting those herring and wool shipments through, it's either band together or get picked apart. Now, let's not romanticize things too much. The medieval era was no Renaissance fair. Public hygiene was more of a suggestion than a practice. Bathing was an annual event for some, and the streets doubled as sewers. If you think New York City in the summer is bad, try navigating a cobblestone street covered in medieval sludge. Yet, despite the less-than-ideal living conditions, these northern cities, like Lübeck, Bremen, and Riga, were bustling hubs. They weren't just building a trade network. They were crafting a lifeline that connected their isolated, chilly corners of the world to the broader European economy. Hanseatic League's formation wasn't just about economics. It was a masterclass in medieval politics. It all kicked off around the mid-12th century, but things really got rolling in the 13th century when Lübeck, the self-proclaimed queen of the Hanseatic League, rose to prominence. Lübeck was like the cool kid in school who everyone wanted to be friends with, partly because it was perfectly positioned along trade routes. Being a port city definitely had its perks, and Lübeck milked them for all they were worth, serving as the gateway between the Baltic and the rest of Europe. The League wasn't an overnight success. It was more like a slow burn that eventually erupted into a full-blown economic inferno. By the 14th century, it boasted over 200 member cities, spanning from London to Novgorod. These cities realized that collective bargaining could work wonders, especially when it came to negotiating trade privileges and defending against pirates. And they did it all without Zoom calls or LinkedIn invites. Impressive, right? The League's members were savvy negotiators, securing trade privileges that made them the envy of merchants everywhere. For instance, their control over the herring market was legendary. Herring was the medieval equivalent of avocado toast. Everyone wanted it, and the Hanseatic League controlled the supply. The League's influence was such that it could dictate terms to kings and dukes like medieval mob bosses. Cross them, and you might find your kingdom suffering a sudden shortage of salt or grain, a fate worse than a Netflix outage today. But let's not pretend it was all smooth sailing on the high seas. The League's power was constantly challenged by those pesky pirates who didn't get the memo about leaving traders alone. These were not the lovable, rum-swilling pirates of Hollywood fame. No, these were ruthless bandits who'd think nothing of relieving you of your cargo, and maybe a few limbs for good measure. The League had to invest heavily in armed convoys to protect its ships, which was a bit like having to hire bodyguards to walk you to your car every time you went shopping. Yet, despite the dangers, the Hanseatic League thrived. It wasn't just about trade. It was about creating a network of mutual support and economic stability in a world where both were as rare as a 5-star Yelp review for a medieval inn. This alliance allowed cities to focus on growth rather than merely surviving, laying the groundwork for what would eventually become the interconnected global economy we know today. Of course, no discussion of the Hanseatic League would be complete without acknowledging its darker side. The League's success wasn't just due to savvy trading and clever alliances. It also had a knack for monopolistic practices that would make even the most cutthroat modern corporations blush. They weren't exactly playing fair, using their collective muscle to squeeze out competition and control markets. And while they were at it, they weren't averse to a bit of political meddling, backing certain rulers or policies that suited their economic agendas. But hey, when you've got a monopoly on herring and beer, you can afford to play the game your way. So, there you have it. A ragtag bunch of medieval cities that decided they were done being the victims of the era's chaos. They formed an alliance that would not only protect their interests, but also reshape the economic landscape of Northern Europe. The Hanseatic League is a testament to the power of cooperation in a world where individualism often ruled the day. It was a bold move, a grand experiment, and a revolutionary turn of events that proved sometimes the best way to get ahead is to band together, whether you're dodging pirates or just trying to make it through rush hour traffic. And so, with dreams of trade domination and a dash of medieval swagger, the Hanseatic League set sail on a journey that would make even the most ambitious startup founders today look like they're taking the scenic route. Now, let's get down to the nitty-gritty of how this motley crew of cities operated, because it wasn't all herring and high fives. Picture a sprawling web of trade routes stretching across the North and Baltic Seas, connecting over 200 cities like a medieval version of the New York subway map, but with fewer delays and more salt. Lübeck, Hamburg, and Bremen were the powerhouses, the New Yorks and L.A.S. of the League. They were joined by cities like Gdansk, Riga, and Tallinn, each one a cog in this massive economic machine that extended to distant outposts like Novgorod in Russia and Bruges in Belgium. These cities weren't just dots on a map. They were vital links in a chain that hauled everything from furs and timber to the medieval holy trinity of beer, grain, and you guessed it, herring. Ah, herring, the unsung hero of the medieval pantry. By the 14th century, the Hanseatic League was moving so much of this fishy gold that it might as well have been swimming in it. We're talking about a trade volume that could have fed entire armies, or at least kept them well stocked with the essential omega-3. To put it into perspective, at its peak, the League controlled around 60% of the herring market in Northern Europe. That's not just a monopoly. That's enough to make today's oil barons blush with envy. But fish wasn't the only thing on the menu. The League's trade routes were bustling with wool from England, salt from the Iberian Peninsula, and honey from Poland. They also dealt in more luxurious items like fine cloth, spices from the East, and even the occasional shipment of amber, because who doesn't need a little bling with their bread and butter? Now, before you start romanticizing this as some kind of medieval trade utopia, let's peel back the layers. The truth is, managing such a vast network was a bit like herding cats, if the cats were prone to embarking on their own trade wars and occasionally stabbing each other in the back. Internal conflicts were as much a part of the League's operations as their trademark triple barrels of herring. Take Lübeck and Hamburg, for example. On the surface, they were bosom buddies, but beneath the camaraderie, there was more tension than a Thanksgiving dinner with the in-laws. Lübeck, often seen as the primus inter pares, that's Latin for first among equals, or the one who likes to boss everyone around, frequently clashed with Hamburg over trade privileges and influence. And it wasn't just these two. Other cities, like Gdansk and Stralsund, were not shy about flexing their muscles when they felt short-changed. These skirmishes usually revolved around who got to control which trade route, or who got the better end of a deal with a foreign power. Think of it like a monopoly game that never ends, where everyone is trying to build the Boardwalk Hotel, but only one has the deed, and they're not sharing. The League's operations were as much about clever diplomacy as they were about economic prowess. They had to constantly negotiate with kings, dukes, and emperors to secure trade privileges, often playing one ruler against another to get the best deal. And if a ruler stepped out of line, well, the League had a sneaky little tool called the Hanseatic embargo. Cross them, and you might find your ports suddenly very quiet, with nary a ship to be seen. It was economic warfare, medieval style. Of course, the League's penchant for playing hardball didn't win them any popularity contests. Many rulers and rival merchants viewed them as a necessary evil, profitable to deal with but difficult to love. And who could blame them? The League had a knack for monopolistic practices that made today's tech giants look positively altruistic. They weren't building bridges. They were fortifying them with toll booths and guards, making sure no one else got a piece of their pie. Yet, despite the constant power plays, the Hanseatic League remained a force to be reckoned with for over 300 years. This was no small feat in an era where alliances were as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. Their success lay in their adaptability and their uncanny ability to navigate the treacherous waters of medieval politics and economics. The League was a testament to what could be achieved through cooperation, even if that cooperation was occasionally more about mutual benefit than mutual affection. They showed that when you combine collective bargaining with a dash of strong-arming, you can carve out a niche for yourself in a world where might often made right. In short, the Hanseatic League wasn't just a trade organization. It was a masterclass in medieval strategy, a testament to the power of unity, and a reminder that sometimes the road to success is paved with salted fish and shrewd negotiations. But don't get too comfortable. The story of the League is far from over. In the next chapters, we'll explore how they navigated external threats, their ultimate decline, and the lasting legacy they left behind. So, hold onto your card pieces, because the ride is just getting started. As the Hanseatic League continued its grand voyage through history, it wasn't just stacking coins and dodging pirates. It was also shaping a cultural and social landscape that would ripple through the centuries. Picture the League as a medieval LinkedIn, but instead of digital profiles, merchants had actual reputations and networks cultivated through face-to-face interactions and a fair bit of letter writing. Yes, before you could connect with a click, you had to sail across the North Sea and make your introductions in person, or at least send a trusted envoy with a strong handshake and a sealed letter. The League's influence was as pervasive as the smell of salted fish in a Lübeck market. It wasn't just about trade. It was about creating a common cultural and legal framework that made doing business a breeze across different regions. Think of it as the medieval version of the terms and conditions you usually scroll past, except these were terms you couldn't ignore if you wanted to do business. The Hanseatic cities developed a sort of universal merchant code, which included standardized weights and measures, and even a kind of proto-insurance system to safeguard against losses at sea. Because if there's one thing merchants hate more than tariffs, it's losing an entire shipment to the briny deep. And let's not forget the language. Low German, or Middle Low German, for those who like their historical linguistics with a side of precision, became the lingua franca of the League. It was the language of contracts and commerce, spoken from Bergen to Bruges and beyond. In a world where linguistic diversity was the norm, every village had its own dialect. Having a common language was a game changer. It's like everyone suddenly decided to start speaking the same version of business English, in an era where even two neighboring towns couldn't agree on what to call bread. The League's architectural legacy is still visible today in the form of brick Gothic buildings that dart the Hanseatic cities. These weren't just any bricks. They were statements of wealth and power, red and formidable, like medieval skyscrapers that declared, yes, we have money, and yes, we know how to use it. The style spread like a 14th century meme, influencing the skyline from the Netherlands to Estonia. Lübeck's Halstentor Gate, with its twin towers and thick walls, was more than just an entryway. It was a symbol of the city's might, and a not-so-subtle reminder to visitors that they were entering a place where commerce was king. But let's not get too misty-eyed about the architectural grandeur. The League cities were also fortresses of exclusivity. The Hanseatic League wasn't exactly the medieval version of the United Nations. It was more like an exclusive club where the entry requirements were as strict as the velvet rope at a high-end nightclub. Membership was largely restricted to German merchants, and if you weren't part of the in-crowd, you could forget about getting those sweet trade privileges. Non-Germans were often sidelined, and the League wasn't above using its clout to push out competitors. It was a world where being the wrong nationality could get you locked out of the economic party. And then there was the piracy issue. The League wasn't just fighting pirates. Sometimes it was the pirates. Privateering, as it was politely called, was one of those morally grey areas where the League's merchants could conveniently forget their scruples. When dealing with a rival city or a troublesome ruler, a little sanctioned piracy could go a long way in making a point or making a profit. So while the League officially decried piracy, it wasn't above hiring a few privateers to do its dirty work. It's a bit like the part calling the kettle black, except this part had a fleet of ships and a penchant for economic dominance. Despite its less savory practices, the Hanseatic League was undeniably a force for standardization in a world that was as chaotic as a medieval fair. It helped create a sense of order out of the commercial chaos, laying the groundwork for the modern economic system we know today. By facilitating trade and communication across vast distances, It brought people and ideas together in ways that were unprecedented for its time. The League's cultural impact also extended to social life. The merchants and their families were among the most cosmopolitan people of their era. They brought back not just goods, but stories and customs from the places they visited, influencing local cultures in subtle and not-so-subtle ways. The League helped spread not just goods, but also ideas, though they were more practical than philosophical. You won't find any Hanseatic merchants debating the nature of existence, but you might catch them discussing the latest herring preservation techniques or the most efficient way to load a cargo hold. In the end, the Hanseatic League was a complex beast, part trade organization, part political entity, part social club. It wielded power with a deft hand, shaping the course of history through its networks and influence. While it may not have had the romantic allure of knights in shining armor or the intellectual glamour of Renaissance scholars, it was no less revolutionary. The League showed that sometimes the most impactful changes come not from grand ideals or heroic deeds, but from the everyday business of trade and negotiation. And as the League sailed into the next chapter of its existence, its legacy was far from over. There were still external threats to navigate, internal conflicts to resolve, and ultimately, the inevitable decline to face. But for now, the Hanseatic League was riding high, testament to the power of collective action in a world where the sea was just as much a battlefield as it was a highway. But let's not get too comfortable with this high seas success story, because just like any tech company that gets too cozy with its early innovations, the Hanseatic League was about to face a brutal wake-up call. Welcome to the late 15th century, when the League's steady sail hit the stormy waters of nation-state emergence, economic shifts, and, well, a bit of its own internal drama. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of a once iconic brand struggling to keep up with the latest Silicon Valley trends. Only instead of software updates, they were dealing with changing trade routes and geopolitical shifts. First off, let's talk about the rise of nation-states. As Europe marched toward the Renaissance, national identities began to solidify. Kings and queens were no longer content with merely reigning. They wanted to rule with centralized power. This was bad news for the Hanseatic League, whose power was built on a loose federation of city-states acting like a medieval justice league. Around 1500, the tide was turning. Rulers like Denmark's Christian I were more interested in consolidating power than in negotiating with a consortium of merchants whose loyalties were as fluid as their travel schedules. Take the Treaty of Utrecht in 1474, a diplomatic disaster for the League. This treaty ended the Anglo-Hanseatic War, but it was England that came out smelling like a rose. The League, on the other hand, found its trade privileges in England severely curtailed. They went from being the medieval VIPs in London to just another group of merchants trying to sell their wares in a crowded market. It's like going from the penthouse suite to a shared ebb. And then there were the changes in trade routes. With Vasco da Gama's successful voyage to India in 1498, the world suddenly felt a lot bigger. The spice trade, which had once crawled through the land routes controlled by the Hanseatic cities, was now sailing around Africa, bypassing them entirely. The League was like a once-thriving DVD rental store, watching helplessly as streaming services took the world by storm. The old trade routes that had been the League's lifeblood were becoming as outdated as a medieval map that still showed dragons beyond the edges. Meanwhile, the League's internal cohesion was about as stable as a game of Jenga played on a rickety table. The once united front of member cities was starting to crumble under the weight of conflicting interests. Lübeck, the leader of this merry band, was losing its grip as other cities began to chafe under its dominance. Hamburg and Bremen, for instance, were growing tired of Lübeck's bossy tendencies and started to pursue their own interests. It was like a rock band where everyone wants to be the lead singer and no one's willing to play the bass. The most glaring example of internal strife was the conflict with Denmark over the vital Øresund Strait. Controlling this narrow passage was crucial for the League's Baltic trade, but Denmark had other ideas. In 1428, the Danish King Eric of Pomerania slapped a toll on the strait, hitting the League where it hurt most, their wallets. The League's response: a naval blockade and a full-blown war, known as the Dano-Hanseatic War, which dragged on until 1435. Sure, they managed to temporarily lift the toll, but the damage was done. The conflict drained resources and strained alliances, making it clear that the League's golden age was showing some serious tarnish. Adding insult to injury, the rise of the Dutch Republic in the late 16th century was like the arrival of a slick new startup with a disruptive business model. The Dutch had the audacity to create a more efficient and centralized trade network, one that could outmaneuver the cumbersome Hanseatic system. By the 1600, the Dutch were dominating the European trade scene, and the League was left scrambling to catch up. It was the medieval version of a once-dominant social media platform watching its user base migrate to the next big thing. In a desperate bid to stay relevant, the League tried to adapt, but their efforts often felt like a medieval version of a company trying to pivot without a clear direction. They attempted to centralize their administration and even established a permanent office in Lubeck in 1580. But it was too little, too late. The League's decentralized structure, once its greatest strength, was now its Achilles heel. It was like trying to run a multinational corporation from a mom-and-pop store. Despite these challenges, the League soldiered on, refusing to fade quietly into the annals of history. By the 17th century, their influence had waned to the point where they were more of a historical footnote than the economic juggernaut they had once been. The last official Hanseatic Diet, a meeting of the League's member cities, was held in 1669, and it was less of a strategic summit and more of a nostalgic reunion. Only 9 cities attended, a far cry from the 200-strong federation that had once ruled the seas. It's tempting to romanticize the Hanseatic League as a plucky underdog fighting against the tide of history, but the reality is more complex. They were a powerful force that thrived on cooperation and strategic negotiation, but they were also a monopoly that didn't know when to relinquish control. They were both victims of their own success and architects of their downfall. Yet, even in decline, the League's legacy was undeniable. They had set the stage for modern trade networks, proving that cooperation could transcend individual ambition. Their influence lingered in the cities they had touched and in the economic systems they had helped to shape. And so, while the Hanseatic League may have eventually sailed into history's sunset, their story was far from over. As we'll see in the next chapter, their legacy would endure in the cultural, economic, and architectural imprints they left behind. So hold onto your merchant caps, because this tale of trade, triumph, and tribulation still has a few more pages to turn. As the curtain fell on the Hanseatic League's golden era, one might be tempted to see their story as just another chapter in the dusty annals of history. But that's where the real intrigue lies. This wasn't merely the story of a medieval trade network that couldn't keep up with the Joneses, or in this case, the Dutch. No, the League's legacy is far more nuanced, a blend of myth and reality that still echoes in today's world. Let's dive into this tale of herring and hubris, of economic innovation and inevitable obsolescence, and see where the ripples of the Hanseatic League still touch our modern shores. First off, let's address the elephant, or perhaps the merchant ship, in the room, the romanticized image of the League as a harmonious confederation of cities working together in perfect unity. Sure, that's a nice story, but if you believe that, I've got a bridge in Lubeck to sell you. The reality was more akin to a family reunion where everyone tries to play nice until the third glass of mead. The League was a masterclass in controlled chaos, a delicate dance of diplomacy and economic clout, where cities cooperated just enough to keep the pirates at bay and the trade routes open. But here's the kicker. The League's model of collaboration wasn't just a medieval curiosity. It was a prototype for modern economic systems, a precursor to the European Union's single market, if you will. The idea that cities, or in today's terms, countries, could band together to create a more stable and prosperous trading environment was revolutionary. It was the medieval equivalent of herding cats, yet they managed it with surprising aplomb. They laid the groundwork for the concept of collective bargaining power, a principle that would later underpin everything from labor unions to international trade agreements. The League's influence on Northern European identity is another enduring legacy. Even today, cities like Hamburg, Bremen, and Lubeck wear their Hanseatic heritage like a badge of honor. It's become part of their brand, a centuries-old identifier that says, we were part of something big, something that shaped history. It's the kind of branding you can't buy, like inheriting a family heirloom that's both a conversation starter and a reminder of where you come from. In fact, the Hanseatic Day, celebrated annually in various member cities, is a testament to their lasting cultural impact. It's a time for these cities to dust off their medieval garb, celebrate their shared history, and maybe even reminisce about those good old days when herring was king. And speaking of herring, let's not forget the League's contribution to the culinary world. Their dominance in the fish trade helped popularize herring across Europe, turning it into a staple that still graces tables from Stockholm to St. Petersburg. Sure, it might not be as glamorous as introducing fine wines or exotic spices, but when it comes to feeding the masses, you can't beat a good pickled herring. It's like the medieval equivalent of the fast food industry, simple, efficient, and available in bulk. But let's not sugarcoat things. The League's monopolistic practices were about as subtle as a Viking raid. They were the original market manipulators, using their economic muscle to control trade routes, dictate prices, and squeeze out competition. It's a practice that would make even the most aggressive modern corporations nod in grudging admiration. Yet, in their defense, they were products of their time, operating in a world where might often made right, and where economic survival depended on being just a bit craftier than the next guy. As we reflect on the League's legacy, it's crucial to balance the romance with the reality. Yes, they were pioneers in many respects, but they were also ruthless competitors who weren't above a bit of skullduggery to maintain their edge. They were both a beacon of cooperation and a cautionary tale of what happens when power goes unchecked. In the end, the Hanseatic League was more than just a historical footnote. It was a pivotal chapter in the story of European commerce. Its ideas of trade and collaboration continue to resonate, influencing everything from regional trade agreements to the way we think about economic partnerships today. The League's real gift was its ability to adapt and innovate, to see the world not just as it was, but as it could be, if only enough cities were willing to come together and make it happen. So, as we close this chapter on the Hanseatic League, let's not forget the lessons it offers. In a world that often feels as chaotic and unpredictable as the medieval seas, the League's story reminds us that sometimes the best way to navigate the storm is to chart a course together. It's a legacy that continues to shape our world, like an ancient brand that never quite goes out of style, a testament to the enduring power of trade, cooperation, and a little bit of medieval swagger. Your eyelids flutter open to the sound of roosters crowing like there's a contest to see who can be the most annoying. Welcome to your life as a 14th century European peasant. The thatched roof above your head is doing its best to keep the rain out, mostly. You're in a cozy little village that smells, well, like a medieval village. A pungent mix of animals, smoke, and whatever your neighbors dumped out the window last night. Get used to it, because soap isn't really a thing yet. As you roll off your straw mattress, the day's first challenge is to get your hands on breakfast. Today's menu features the culinary delight of stale bread, possibly hard enough to double as a weapon, and a mug of thin ale. Yes, ale for breakfast. It's not about getting a morning buzz. It's about survival. Water's not safe to drink, so weak ale is your hydration of choice. Think of it as medieval Gatorade. Your morning grind involves heading out to the fields. Farming here isn't for the faint-hearted. It's a back-breaking job that's as reliable as a medieval clock, which is to say, not very. You're at the mercy of the weather, and let's just say the climate isn't exactly your best bud. This is subsistence farming, where your success is measured in not starving to death. High stakes, huh? Meanwhile, a darker shadow looms on the horizon, the Black Death. It's creeping through Europe like a grim reaper on a road trip. This plague doesn't discriminate. It's got its sights set on everyone, and it's already wiped out nearly a third of the population where it's hit hardest. You've heard stories of entire towns left in silence, and if there's one thing that travels fast, it's bad news. Now, let's talk about disease in your time. Spoiler alert, germ theory is about as real to you as Wi-Fi. The prevailing belief is that disease comes from miasmas, or bad air. If you want to stay healthy, you better keep a pocket full of posies close by to sniff. Imagine thinking a bouquet is your best defense against death. But hey, the science of the time says it works, and who are you to argue? Speaking of smells, there's also the theory of balancing your humors. According to this, your body is a cocktail of 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. If these get out of whack, you're in trouble. Doctors, if you can call them that, will happily bleed you out to restore balance, which sounds medieval because it is. If you're lucky, you might just get advice to wear a parmander, a fancy word for a scented ball, around your neck to ward off pestilence. As you shuffle through the village, the chatter is all about the plague. Everyone's got an opinion, a rumor, or a miracle cure that definitely, probably, absolutely won't work. The local priest insists it's God's punishment, while the village healer swears by a concoction of herbs and, bizarrely, crushed emeralds. It's a wild mix of superstition and desperation. Despite the looming threat, life goes on. You've got fields to tend, animals to care for, and a family to feed. There's no time to dwell on the morbid details when your day is filled with chores that don't wait for anyone, not even a pandemic. Lunchtime rolls around, and if you're lucky, it's more bread with maybe a sliver of cheese if the mice haven't gotten to it first. You eat quickly, always keeping one eye on the skies and one ear on the village gossip. By afternoon, your back is aching from the relentless work, and your stomach is already grumbling for dinner. The sun is starting its descent, casting long shadows that seem to stretch out the day. It's been a typical day, but those are becoming rare as the plague edges nearer. You hear that the nearest town has shut its gates, refusing entry to anyone from the outside. It's a desperate measure, but desperate times and all that. As the sky begins to darken, you make your way back to your humble abode. The evening is for mending tools, chatting with family, and maybe sharing a story or two by the fire. Tonight's tale might be about the village that supposedly survived the plague by hanging garlic everywhere. It's a comforting myth, even if it's as thin as your morning ale. Finally, as you settle down for the night, you can't help but think about the world outside your village. There's a creeping change in the air, and it's not just the plague. Europe is on the brink of transformation, though you couldn't possibly know it. For now, your world is small, a village, a farm, a family. And as you close your eyes, you hope tomorrow will be just a little bit better, or at least not much worse. With your dreams interrupted by the crow of a particularly enthusiastic rooster, you're pulled back into the world of medieval reality. Today's agenda, a trip to the town market. It's not just about grabbing a few essentials. It's a journey into the heart of a world teetering on the edge of chaos. The market, usually a bustling hub of commerce and chatter, is now a shadow of its former self, thanks to a little thing called the Black Death. You shuffle along the muddy path, dodging puddles and the occasional wayward goat. The market is a mere 2 miles from your village, but each step feels heavier with the weight of what you might find there. Or more likely, what you won't. You're not alone in your pilgrimage. Others from your village have the same idea, perhaps hoping the market will offer something other than the usual despair. Arriving at the market, you're hit by the sight of sparsely filled stalls and the sobering realization that the plague doesn't just take lives, it takes livelihoods. With nearly a third of the population already gone, it's no surprise that the economy is in tatters. The labor force has all but vanished, and those who remain know their worth. Wages for workers have doubled, even tripled in some areas. If you're a peasant with a strong back and a willingness to risk it all, you're suddenly the medieval equivalent of a hot commodity. But here's the kicker. While workers might be cashing in on their newfound value, the cost of goods has skyrocketed. Take bread, for instance. It's gone from a humble staple to a luxury item. A loaf that used to cost a mere penny now commands a price that makes you question your life choices, if you can find any at all. It's not just the bread. Everything from wool to wine has shot up in price, turning simple purchases into strategic decisions. The market, once a cacophony of haggling and bartering, is eerily quiet, save for the desperate cries of merchants trying to offload their dwindling stock. The economic model, if you can call it that, is a mess. Supply and demand are playing an unholy game of tug-of-war, and it's not clear who's winning. The local lord, usually a looming figure of authority, is finding his grip on power slipping as fast as the coins from his coffers. With fewer peasants to till his land, his income is taking a hit, and his desperation is palpable. He's not alone. Across Europe, lords are scrambling to impose wage limits and keep their estates from crumbling into ruin. Meanwhile, church is having a field day. On one hand, it's offering explanations that range from divine punishment to bizarrely witchcraft. On the other, it's exploiting the chaos to fill its own pockets. Indulgences are a hot commodity, with people willing to pay for a fast track to heaven just in case the plague comes knocking. It's a grim business, but business nonetheless. As you wander the market, you overhear snippets of conversation that paint a vivid picture of a society in flux. There's talk of entire villages abandoned, fields left untended. The rumors fly faster than a medieval messenger on horseback. Some claim the dead are rising, others that the end of days is nigh. It's part fear, part fascination, and 100% human nature. You pause by a stall selling herbs, the vendor hawking them as miracle cures. The irony isn't lost on you. In an age before antibiotics, people cling to whatever hope they can find, even if it's in the form of a dried plant. The vendor's patter is as smooth as silk, promising health and prosperity for a few coins. It's a tempting offer, but you know better. If crushed emeralds can't ward off the plague, what chance does a sprig of rosemary have? The political landscape is shifting too. With traditional power structures failing, new voices are rising. Some call for reform, others for revolt. It's a turbulent time, and the smart money is on those who can adapt. You can feel it in the air, a sense that the old ways are crumbling, making way for something new. What that is, nobody can say, but it's clear that Europe is on the brink of transformation. As the sun dips towards the horizon, you make your way back home, your mind a whirl of thoughts. The market may be in shambles, but it's also a mirror reflecting the wider world. Change is coming, whether you like it or not. You can only hope you're ready for it. With your modest purchases stowed safely away, you return to the familiar comforts of village life, where the pace is slower, and the problems, though daunting, are at least familiar. Your evening unfolds as usual, with the comforting routine of dinner and shared stories by the fire. But the day's events linger in your mind, a reminder that the world is shifting beneath your feet. As you lay down to sleep, you can't help but wonder what tomorrow will bring. Whatever it is, you'll face it as you always have, one day at a time, with a healthy dose of skepticism and a pocket full of posies, just in case. As you drift off to sleep, your mind swirling with the day's events, you can't shake the sense that the world is unraveling faster than a poorly knitted woolen sock. The dawn greets you with a crisp reminder that in the 14th century, there are no weekends, just another day in the medieval grind. But today's agenda is a bit different. You're off to the monastery, a place where the spiritual meets the medical. Spoiler alert, the two don't always get along. The monastery is a short trek from your village, nestled in the rolling hills like a stoic guardian of faith and hopefully health. As you approach, the air is thick with incense, part prayer, part pestilence prevention. You're greeted by the sight of monks bustling about with the kind of urgency usually reserved for a flock of chickens that's just seen a fox. The monastery has become a reluctant hospital, and its residents are on the front lines of a battle they're woefully ill-equipped to fight. Inside, the scene is a bleak tableau of suffering, a medieval ER without the comforting beeps of modern machines. The sick are laid out on straw pallets, the air filled with the low hum of moans and whispered prayers. It's a grim reminder that the Black Death doesn't do half measures. Mortality rates here are a jaw-dropping 30-50%, which means if you're flipping a coin on survival, you're not playing with great odds. The monks, bless their souls, are doing their best with what little they know. Enter the 14th century medical toolkit, a mix of bloodletting, herbal concoctions, and a sprinkle of divine intervention. Bloodletting is all the rage, based on the charmingly misguided belief that draining a few pints will rebalance your humors. Imagine your body as a medieval cocktail, and your local monk as the world's least qualified bartender, adjusting your fluids with a razor instead of a shaker. Herbal remedies are the other go-to, a mix of hope and horticulture. The monastery garden is a pharmacy of sorts, with everything from sage to rosemary touted as a cure-all. The monks apply these concoctions with the zeal of a medieval influencer hawking miracle cures. Yet, in the absence of real medicine, these herbs are more placebo than panacea. Still, when the alternative is nothing, a little basil doesn't hurt. Amidst the chaos, you hear whispers of Giovanni Boccaccio's tales from Florence. His vivid accounts in the Decameron paint a picture of a society unraveling. He describes how the rich flee to their country estates, while the poor are left to fend for themselves in cities that have become open-air morgues. It's a story of human resilience, but also of stark inequality. A reality check that not everyone has the luxury to escape. Boccaccio's stories also touch on the psychological toll of the plague. Survivors are left to grapple with grief, guilt, and the haunting question of why they lived when so many others did not. It's a medieval version of survivor's guilt, a heavy burden for those who make it through. The trauma reshapes communities, leaving scars that are as invisible as they are profound. As you wander through the monastery, the monks' dedication is evident, even if their methods are suspect. They administer last rites as often as they do herbal poultices, a testament to the grim reality that faith is often the only comfort they can truly offer. The plague is indiscriminate, cutting down the pious and the pagan alike. In this place, the human condition is laid bare, a stark reminder that in the face of such a relentless force, everyone is equal. You overhear discussions about the origins of the disease. Some blame the wrath of God, others the alignment of the stars. It's a medieval guessing game, and everyone's got a theory. Miasmas, or bad air, are a popular culprit, which explains the abundance of posies and scented oils. It's a bit like trying to stop a flood with a handkerchief, but desperate times call for desperate measures. Throughout your visit, the monks remain a picture of stoic resilience. They're caught in an impossible situation, trying to navigate a world where the rules have suddenly changed. The plague is a crucible, testing the limits of human endurance and compassion. Despite the odds, the monks persevere, their faith a beacon in the darkness, even if it's more flicker than flame. As you leave the monastery, the weight of the world presses down on you. The Black Death isn't just a disease. It's a catalyst for change, tearing down old structures and forcing a re-evaluation of what it means to be human. The monastery, with its blend of faith and fumbling medicine, is a microcosm of a society in flux, grappling with forces it can barely comprehend. You make your way back to the village, the path familiar yet changed. The world is shifting, and with it, the very foundations of life as you know it. The monastery visit lingers in your mind, a reminder that in the face of such overwhelming odds, survival is as much about hope and community as it is about medicine. As the sun dips below the horizon, your thoughts drift to the future. The Black Death is a harbinger of change, a grim herald of a new era. Europe stands on the precipice of transformation, and while the path forward is uncertain, one thing is clear: nothing will ever be the same. You settle in for the night, the events of the day echoing in your mind. Tomorrow is a new day, and whatever it brings, you'll face it with the same resilience that's carried you this far. With a deep breath, you drift into sleep, the shadows of a changing world dancing on the edge of your dreams. As morning light peeks through the cracks in your thatched roof, you're jolted back to reality by the ever-reliable medieval alarm clock, the village rooster that clearly missed the memo about daylight savings. The world outside your tiny cottage hasn't gotten any less chaotic, and today's agenda involves facing the siege of rumors and half-truths swirling around like medieval Twitter. Back in the village, it's clear that daily life is a tightrope walk over an abyss of uncertainty. The plague has turned your once bustling community into a ghost of its former self. Houses are shuttered, and those few who dare venture out do so with a wary eye, as if the very air is plotting against them. And in a way, it is. The dreaded miasma theory has everyone convinced that bad air is the harbinger of death. So, naturally, the village wise woman is doing brisk trade in posies and scented oils, her stall a fragrant oasis in a sea of anxiety. Quarantine practices have hit your village in full force. It's not like there's a medieval CDC issuing guidelines, but the local lord has taken matters into his own hands with village lock-ins. Picture a lockdown without the Netflix binge. The village gates are closed to outsiders, and travel is restricted to essentials only. Think fetching water, not a casual jaunt to see the relatives. The idea is to stop the spread, but it's also a breeding ground for cabin fever and a smorgasbord of rumors. Speaking of rumors, let's dive into the murky waters of medieval scapegoating. In times of crisis, humans have an uncanny knack for finding someone to blame, and the 14th century is no exception. A particularly nasty narrative has taken root, claiming that Jews are poisoning wells to spread the plague. It's a vile accusation, but in a world grasping for explanations, it's gaining traction faster than a runaway cart. This baseless myth is fueling a wave of violence across Europe. In places like Strasbourg and Basel, entire Jewish communities have been massacred in well-poisoning hysteria. It's a grim reminder that fear often trumps reason, turning ordinary people into perpetrators of extraordinary cruelty. Luckily, your village has so far avoided such extremities, but the undercurrent of suspicion is palpable. Now, let's talk about the flagellants. These folks have taken self-punishment to Olympic levels, parading through villages with a fervor that's half religious zeal, half medieval reality TV. They're convinced that the plague is divine retribution, and the way to atone is by whipping themselves in public. It's a display that's as unsettling as it is fascinating, a traveling sideshow of human suffering with a soundtrack of chanting hymns and cracking whips. The flagellant movement has spread like wildfire, a grassroots crusade against sin and pestilence. You watch as they march through your village, a procession of the penitent and the pained. Their self-flagellation is both a plea for mercy and a public spectacle, drawing crowds that are as curious as they are uncomfortable. It's the medieval equivalent of rubbernecking at a car crash, morbidly fascinating, yet deeply unsettling. Amidst this chaos, economic realities are shifting beneath your feet. The labor shortage has driven wages up, but with inflation hitting hard, it's a bittersweet victory. A good loaf of bread now costs as much as a week's wages, if you can find one at all. The local blacksmith has resorted to bartering his services for food, a return to a simpler, albeit more precarious, economy. In the fields, the absence of able-bodied workers means more land is lying fallow, a silent testament to the plague's relentless march. For those who remain, there's a grim silver lining. With fewer mouths to feed, there's less competition for resources. It's a harsh truth, but in the calculus of survival, it's an advantage. Despite, or perhaps because of, the chaos, the church is doubling down on its role as spiritual anchor. Priests preach about the need for repentance, their sermons a heady mix of fire and brimstone. The sale of indulgences is booming, offering a fast track to salvation for those with the coin to spare. It's a grim business, but business nonetheless, as the church capitalizes on the fear of dying unshriven. As you navigate this new normal, you can't help but marvel at humanity's capacity for both cruelty and compassion. The same villagers who whisper darkly about poisoned wells are the ones leaving food on the doorsteps of the sick, a gesture of solidarity in a time of suspicion. It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, light finds a way to flicker through. As the day wanes, you gather with your fellow villagers around a makeshift fire, the warmth a balm against the encroaching chill. Stories flow as freely as the weak ale, tales of heroism and horror that bind the community together in shared experience. You listen to accounts of distant towns devastated by the plague, their once bustling streets now silent, save for the mournful toll of funeral bells. Yet, amidst the tales of woe, there are glimmers of resilience. Stories of communities banding together, of neighbors looking out for one another, of small acts of kindness that pierce the gloom. It's a reminder that while the plague is a force of nature, the human spirit is a force of its own, capable of enduring even the harshest trials. As you prepare for another night under your thatched roof, you reflect on the day's events. The world is changing at a pace unprecedented in your lifetime, each day bringing new challenges and new stories to tell. The plague may have cast a long shadow, but within it, life persists, a testament to the indomitable will to survive. With a final glance at the flickering fire, you retreat into the familiar embrace of your straw mattress, the weight of the world heavy on your shoulders. Tomorrow promises more of the same uncertainty, but also the potential for change, for growth, for a future that, while uncertain, is yours to shape. As you drift into a fitful sleep, your dreams are filled with visions of a world transformed, of a society reborn from the ashes of its own suffering. It's a dream tempered by the reality of your waking life, but a dream nonetheless, one that promises hope, even in the face of despair. As the soft glow of dawn filters through the gaps in your thatched roof, you're reminded that the world outside is spinning on an axis of change. The Black Death hasn't just decimated populations, it's turned society inside out and upside down. It's like a medieval version of Marie Kondo, except instead of tidying up, it's upending the whole social order and leaving everyone to figure out what still sparks joy, or at least survival. The plague's impact on social structures is a seismic shift, shaking the foundations of feudalism until they crack. With up to 60% of Europe's population wiped out in some areas, the labor force has been gutted like a fish on market day. Suddenly, the serfs, those backbone of the fief types, find themselves in demand like never before. Picture a medieval job fair where the tables have turned, and it's the lords who are polishing their resumes. The shortage of workers means that wages have skyrocketed, and serfs, for the first time, have the leverage to demand better conditions or higher pay. It's like winning the peasant lottery, except the prize is more work and slightly better bread. In England, for example, wages for agricultural labourers shot up by about 50% in the years following the plague. The Statute of Labourers in 1351 tried to cap wages at pre-plague levels, but enforcing it was like trying to herd cats with an abacus. The law was a feeble attempt to shove the genie back in the bottle, but the bottle had been shattered, and the genie was busy negotiating a better deal for its services. As serfs gain a modicum of freedom, the feudal system, where lords own the land and peasants work it for protection, starts to unravel. This shift is like medieval dynamite blasting away the old order, paving the way for a more flexible, market-driven economy. And while this doesn't mean everyone is suddenly living in luxury, it does set the stage for the slow, messy birth of capitalism. Economically, the plague is a mixed bag. On one hand, fewer people mean less demand for food, leading to a drop in prices. On the other, the supply of goods has also dwindled, thanks to a lack of hands to produce them. It's a strange balance of scarcity and abundance, where grain might be cheap, but good luck finding someone to harvest it. Landowners, desperate to keep their estates productive, start leasing plots to peasants, who pay rent rather than owing labor. This shift is a prelude to the agricultural changes and land enclosures that will define the coming centuries. And then there's the psychological toll, the kind of trauma that leaves invisible scars, etched into the collective consciousness. Imagine living through a time when death is as unpredictable as the weather, claiming your neighbors, your family, maybe even your priest. The survivors are left with a cocktail of survivor's guilt and a profound sense of impermanence, a medieval existential crisis, if ever there was one. But this brush with mortality also sparks a new appreciation for life, fueling a cultural renaissance that celebrates the human experience in all its messy glory. Speaking of which, the Renaissance, often hailed as a golden age of art and science, is partly the result of this societal overhaul. The Black Death clears the stage for new ideas, challenging the rigid structures of medieval life and opening minds to new philosophies. The printing press, invented in the mid-15th century, serves as a megaphone for these ideas, spreading them faster than a medieval rumor. It's like the TED talks of the 1400, democratizing knowledge and sparking a thirst for learning that had been stymied by the church's monopoly on education. In the arts, this shift is palpable. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo emerge, inspired by a renewed focus on humanism, a belief in the potential and value of human beings. This is art that looks outward, reflecting a world where people are beginning to question the status quo. The Renaissance is the ultimate rebranding of Europe, shaking off the dust of the so-called Dark Ages to reveal a continent ready to embrace its potential. Of course, the term Dark Ages is a bit of a misnomer, one conjured up by later historians with a flair for the dramatic. It suggests a time of stagnation and ignorance, but the medieval period was anything but. It was a time of incremental progress and resilience, where communities adapted to upheaval with ingenuity and tenacity. The myth of the Dark Ages might captivate the imagination, but the reality is one of gradual evolution, where the seeds of modern Europe were sown amid the challenges of the time. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows over the landscape of a transformed Europe, you reflect on the resilience of the human spirit. The Black Death, for all its horror, is a crucible that tests and ultimately strengthens the fabric of society. It's a testament to humanity's ability to adapt, to find light in darkness, and to rebuild from the ashes of catastrophe. The plague has reshaped Europe, not with the swift strike of a sword, but with the slow, inexorable force of change. It's a reminder that history is not a series of isolated events, but a tapestry woven from countless threads of experience, each one contributing to the rich and complex story of our past. As you close your eyes, you carry with you the knowledge that from great trials come great transformations, and that the future is a canvas awaiting the brushstrokes of those brave enough to face it. The first light of dawn sneaks through the stone windows of your medieval monastery, casting long, cold shadows across the flagstone floor. You've barely had time to rub the sleep from your eyes when the sound of the bell cuts through the silence like a medieval alarm clock. It's 3:30 a.m., and while the rest of the world snoozes under layers of wool, you're already on your feet. Monks have been defying the siren call of sleep long before the Silicon Valley crowd claimed dawn as their own personal productivity hack. Now, let's talk about that bell. It's more than just a wake-up call. It's the heartbeat of monastic life. Forget your digital watches and smartphone alerts. In the medieval monastery, the bell is the ultimate timekeeper, guiding everything from prayer to meals to work. This isn't just about marking time. It's about sanctifying it. Each peal is an invitation to step out of the mundane and into the divine. But don't get too lost in the romance of it all. The reality is that bell is also a practical tool, ensuring you don't drift off into an unauthorized nap. Because let's face it, even the holiest of monks can sometimes lose focus. And that brings us to the horarium, the daily schedule that dictates every hour of your life here. It's a rigorous timetable that would make even the most disciplined of modern-day planners twitch. First up is matins, the night office, a little something to remind you that spiritual devotion doesn't take a night off. It's followed by lauds at the crack of dawn, just in case you needed a reminder that holiness waits for no one. Each prayer session is timed to perfection, thanks to the aforementioned bell and its faithful ringing. But why the early rise? It's not just about getting a jump on the day. In medieval times, the monastic schedule is a reflection of the belief that every moment is a gift from God, not to be squandered. While the rest of the world might see the pre-dawn hours as prime sleeping time, in the monastery, it's considered sacred silence, a chance to commune with God before the day's chaos begins. Sure, it sounds poetic, but try telling that to your aching feet as they shuffle along the cold stone corridor. Now, let's talk architecture. Your monastery is more than just a spiritual haven. It's a finely tuned machine designed for a life of prayer, work, and study. Unlike the sprawling castles of the nobility, the monastery is all about efficiency and purpose. Every archway, cloister, and refectory serves a specific function. The church is, of course, the centerpiece, but there's more to explore. The chapter house for meetings, the dormitory for what little sleep you do get, and the refectory where meals are less about indulgence and more about sustenance. The cloisters are where you'll spend much of your day, a sort of medieval version of lap walking, where you can pace and meditate without stepping into the muck outside. These covered walkways are designed to protect you from the elements while still allowing you the chance to reflect and pray. It's a little like those modern office paths designed for focus, but with a lot more stone and a lot less beanbag. Of course, let's not get too swept away by the romantic image of the monastery as a peaceful retreat from the world. Sure, it's a place of spiritual refuge, but it's also a place of hard work and discipline. The walls might keep the outside world at bay, but they also keep you in, committed to a life of order and devotion. There's no room for the chaos or unpredictability that defines life outside these walls. In here, the only surprises are whether the bread will be fresh or slightly stale today. As you make your way through the chilly corridors, the architecture itself becomes a testament to the balance between heaven and earth. The vaulted ceilings and intricate carvings are not just displays of artistic flair. They are reminders of the divine order you've committed to. Yet, every stone and beam serves a practical purpose, showcasing a blend of spiritual aspiration and earthly necessity. As the morning progresses, you can't help but appreciate the sheer ingenuity that went into designing these spaces. The monastery is a self-sustaining ecosystem long before sustainability becomes a buzzword. From the gardens that provide fresh herbs and vegetables to the scriptorium, where manuscripts are painstakingly copied by hand, every corner of the monastery is a lesson in medieval multitasking. So, as you shuffle along those ancient stones, take a moment to appreciate the delicate balance of structure and spirit that defines your medieval day. It's a life that's regimented yet rich with purpose, where every hour is accounted for and every action is a step closer to the divine. While the romantic allure of monastic life might have its appeal, living it is an entirely different story. A story of grit, devotion, and a daily dance with the divine. As you shuffle along those ancient stones, take a moment to appreciate the delicate balance of structure and spirit that defines your medieval day. It's a life that's regimented yet rich with purpose, where every hour is accounted for and every action is a step closer to the divine. While the romantic allure of monastic life might have its appeal, living it is an entirely different story. A story of grit, devotion, and a daily dance with the divine. And speaking of structure, let's head into the morning chapter meeting. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of your Monday morning office huddle, but with a bit more gravitas and a lot more Latin. Gathered in the chapter house, the monks convene to discuss everything from spiritual matters to the very practical concerns of running a monastic community. It's not just a place for prayer and reflection, though there's plenty of that, but also a forum for governance and decision-making. Here, the abbot presides, a figure both revered and a tad intimidating, like your boss, but with a more impressive beard and a direct line to the divine. This is where the division of labor is hashed out. If you thought the Benedictine rule was just about praying and singing, think again. These monks were medieval multitaskers, masters of the art of doing a lot with a little. The daily grind involved copying manuscripts in the scriptorium, tending to the gardens, and everything in between. Each monk had a role, and each role was critical to the monastery's self-sufficiency. Imagine a medieval Silicon Valley startup, but instead of coding apps, you're illuminating texts. The scribe, hunched over parchment, was the medieval equivalent of a software engineer, ensuring that knowledge both sacred and secular was preserved for future generations. The materials, parchment made from animal skins, and ink concocted from oak galls and iron salts. Talk about artisanal. Then there's the agriculture side of things. Monks could teach modern homesteaders a thing or two about sustainable living. The gardens were the lifeblood of the monastery, producing vegetables and herbs that were essential not just for meals, but also for medicinal purposes. And let's not forget the brewing and winemaking, because even the holiest of men knew that a little fermented grape juice can make the divine seem even closer. The economic context here is as rich as the soil in those monastic gardens. Monasteries were microcosms of medieval economy, self-contained units that relied on the labor of the monks to thrive. Everything was a matter of balance and efficiency. The cost of materials was significant. Parchment could cost as much as a cow, and so nothing was wasted. Every scrap of material, every minute of labor had to be justified. Talk about pressure. Monasteries also played a crucial role in the local economy. They were not isolated fortresses of faith, but active participants in the broader economic landscape. They provided employment for laypeople, engaged in trade, and even lent money, acting as medieval banks before the term was coined. The surrounding villagers depended on the monastery for everything from spiritual guidance to economic stability. It's a symbiotic relationship, with the monastery at the heart of it all, like a medieval Wall Street with a lot more prayer and a lot less greed. But let's not mythologize the grind too much. The romantic notion of monks as serene scribes or gentle gardeners often glosses over the harsh realities. The work was grueling, the hours long, and the rewards strictly spiritual. There's a reason the rule of St. Benedict emphasizes humility and obedience. It's not easy to keep the divine in focus when you're knee-deep in cabbage. Yet for many, the appeal of monastic life lay precisely in its rigor, a structured path to holiness in a world full of chaos. So, as you sit in that chapter house, listening to the abbot outline the day's tasks, remember that this isn't just about spiritual enlightenment. It's about survival. Every monk contributes to the greater good, whether it's by tilling the fields or transcribing the sacred texts. The division of labor is not just about efficiency. It's about ensuring that the monastery remains a bastion of faith and learning amidst the uncertainties of medieval life. And just like that, the meeting concludes, and it's time to roll up those sleeves. Metaphorically speaking, of course, since habits aren't exactly conducive to manual labor. As you head off to your assigned duties, consider the weight of tradition and innovation that you carry. You're part of a long line of monks who, through their work and devotion, shaped not just the monastery, but the world beyond its walls. Because while the world may change, the need for balance between the sacred and the mundane remains as crucial as ever. As you head off to your assigned duties, the thought of the midday meal, refectory time, starts to creep into your mind. It's the medieval equivalent of daydreaming about lunch during a boring meeting, but instead of a trip to the food truck, you're headed to the cloistered dining hall. You might think, given all that talk of frugality and simplicity, that monks subsisted on a diet of bread, water, and an extra helping of holiness. But buckle up, because we're about to dive into a culinary landscape that's a touch more nuanced than dry crusts and thin gruel. The refectory, where monks gather for their meals, is a place of stark contrasts. It's where the ideals of asceticism meet the realities of medieval agricultural abundance. The rule of St. Benedict prescribes moderation, but moderation is a flexible term when you're coming off a 12-hour prayer and work marathon. So, what do these medieval holy men actually eat? Well, let's start with some basics. Bread, the cornerstone of the monastic diet, is as ubiquitous as a medieval meme. But don't let the simplicity fool you. Bread comes in a variety of forms, from humble barley loaves to the more luxurious wheat breads, depending on the monastery's resources and the season. Vegetables are next on the menu, often sourced from the monastery's own gardens. Think of it as the original farm-to-table movement, minus the hipster price tag. Cabbage, onions, leeks, and beans frequently make an appearance. These aren't just side dishes, but vital components of the monastic diet, rich in nutrients and versatility. But here's a twist. Monks also consume fish, particularly on fasting days when meat is off the table. And trust me, medieval fasting makes your current diet plan look like a buffet. Fish, particularly freshwater varieties, are often farmed right on the monastery grounds. It's a sustainable practice that predates modern aquaculture by several centuries, proving once again that monks were the original eco-warriors. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the cow. Meat is technically a no-no in many monastic orders, but loopholes abound. In some places, meat from four-legged animals is restricted, but poultry and game birds, being conveniently bipedal, manage to sneak past the rules. So, while a nice juicy steak might be out of the question, a roasted goose could very well grace the table on feast days, which occur more frequently than you might think. Feast days offer a break from the routine, a holy excuse to indulge a little, with the added benefit of reinforcing communal bonds. It's like Thanksgiving with a lot more chanting and a lot less awkward family politics. Speaking of indulgence, let's not forget the drink of choice, ale. Monastic brewing is serious business, with some monasteries producing enough to sustain not just the monks, but also visitors and lay workers. The ale is often low in alcohol, designed to hydrate rather than intoxicate, but on special occasions, stronger brews make an appearance. Wine also flows in monasteries located in suitable climates, with vineyards being carefully tended by the monks. This might seem like a divine loophole, but consider the context. Water quality in medieval times is often questionable at best. So, fermented beverages are not just a luxury, but a necessity. Now, before you start picturing a medieval frat party, remember that meals in the refectory are sama, silent affairs. Conversation is swapped for scripture readings, a practice that keeps the focus on spiritual nourishment while you're physically refueling. It's a bit like having a podcast on while you eat, if that podcast were narrated by a monk in Latin. Despite the silence, there's a sense of community, a shared experience that transcends the individual and reinforces the monastic ideal of living not for oneself, but for the collective good. But let's not romanticize it too much. This is medieval Europe, after all, a time when food security isn't guaranteed. Harvests can fail, and when they do, the monastic diet takes a turn for the austere. Fasting, already a regular feature, becomes a survival strategy. Austerity might be a virtue, but it's also a harsh reality when the pantry runs low. Yet these challenges also reveal the resilience and adaptability of monastic communities. They are adept at preserving food, salting fish, drying fruits, and storing grains to stretch resources through the lean times. The impact of agricultural practices on monastery meals is profound. Monasteries are often centers of agricultural innovation, experimenting with crop rotation and selective breeding long before these techniques become widespread. Their work in fields and gardens not only feeds the monks, but also supports the local economy. The surplus is often shared with the poor or given to travelers, reinforcing the monastery's role as both a spiritual and economic anchor in the community. So, as you sit in the refectory, breaking bread with your fellow monks, remember that this meal represents more than just sustenance. It's a microcosm of medieval life, a blend of scarcity and abundance, simplicity and complexity, all underpinned by the belief that every morsel is a gift from God. In a world where the next meal is never guaranteed, the refectory becomes a place of gratitude and reflection, a daily reminder of the delicate balance between the divine and the mundane. As you take that last bite, the bell rings again, signaling the end of another chapter in your monastic day. It's back to work, whether in the scriptorium, the gardens, or the chapel. Each task is an opportunity to live out the ideals of the monastic life, a chance to find holiness in the humdrum. So, as you rise from the table, take a moment to appreciate the meal you've just shared, a testament to the ingenuity, community, and faith that define monastic life, then and now. As you rise from the table, the monastery's afternoon rhythm beckons you back to the world of ink and parchment. It's time to dive into the scriptorium, the heart of monastic scholarship, where monks transform into the medieval equivalent of publishing moguls. This is where knowledge is born, reborn, and sometimes painstakingly illuminated with gold leaf, as if to say, even in the Middle Ages, bling was a thing. Now, before you conjure up images of solitary monks hunched over desks in dimly lit alcoves, let's burst that bubble of solitude. The scriptorium is a veritable hive of activity, more akin to a bustling newsroom than a quiet study. Monastic learning is a team sport. The myth of the lone monk, isolated in silent contemplation, is as misleading as a medieval map of the world. Sure, silence reigns supreme here, but it's a shared silence, a communal effort where each monk plays a part in the grand tapestry of knowledge preservation. The task at hand is more than mere transcription. Monks are not just passive scribes. They're editors, translators, and sometimes even authors. They don't just copy texts. They collate and commentate, ensuring that when the next scholar picks up this manuscript, they get a clearer picture of the world as understood in the cloistered confines of the abbey. This is the medieval version of a peer-reviewed journal, but without the relentless email reminders. And the manuscripts, they're no ordinary books. Some are sacred texts, Bibles, psalters, breviaries, while others are secular, including works by Aristotle, Herodotus, or Cicero. You might even find a monk with a penchant for poetry sneaking in a verse or two. Each page is a labor of love, an intricate dance of letters and light that can take months, sometimes years, to complete. The materials involved are as precious as the texts themselves. Parchment, often made from the skins of sheep or goats, is so costly that a single Bible could take up the hides of over 250 animals. But let's not romanticize the scriptorium as a place of uninterrupted intellectual pursuit. The reality is far less idyllic. Imagine spending hours upon hours, day after day, meticulously copying each line with no room for error. One slip of the quill, and you're scraping off ink with a pumice stone to avoid wasting expensive parchment. It's a painstaking process that requires both skill and patience, a true test of monastic endurance. Economically, the scriptorium is a powerhouse. Manuscripts are commodities, and wealthy patrons' commission works not just for spiritual salvation, but for prestige. A well-illuminated manuscript is a status symbol, the medieval equivalent of owning a rare first edition or an original Banksy. Monasteries, in turn, use these commissions to fund their operations, making the scriptorium a critical component of their economic survival. And what about the myth of the uneducated medieval monk? Toss that notion aside. Monasteries are the Ivy Leagues of the Middle Ages, centers of learning where knowledge is not just preserved, but nurtured. Monks are often multilingual, well-versed in Latin, Greek, and sometimes even Arabic, thanks to the cultural exchanges that took place during the Crusades. The monastery is a melting pot of ideas, where scholars debate theology, philosophy, and science, often pushing the boundaries of what is known. The afternoon hours slip by in a flurry of ink and parchment, the steady scratch of quills creating a symphony of scholarly dedication. By the time the bell signals the end of the workday, you've contributed your part to the vast sea of monastic knowledge, a collective effort that ensures the survival of ideas through the turbulent tides of history. And as you leave the scriptorium, remember that the monastery's role as a center of learning is not just about preserving the past, but shaping the future. The works copied here will travel far beyond the cloistered walls, influencing scholars and thinkers across Europe and laying the groundwork for the Renaissance. It's a testament to the enduring power of knowledge and the pivotal role monasteries play in keeping the flame of learning alive during times of darkness. So, as the sun sets and the day draws to a close, take a moment to reflect on the quiet revolution happening within these stone walls. The The monks, through their dedication to scholarship, are not just preserving the past, they're building a bridge to the future. Each manuscript, a beacon of light in a world often shrouded in shadow, speaks to the enduring human quest for understanding, a journey that continues even today. As the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of amber and violet, the monastery's bell tolls again, marking the transition from the bustle of the scriptorium to the sacred stillness of evening prayer. Welcome to Vespers, the evening prayer that caps the monastic day, a ritual as much about the soul as it is about the setting sun. Vespers is where the day's spiritual marathon rounds its final lap, a time when monks gather in the church to chant psalms and hymns, creating a symphony of devotion that echoes through the stone arches. The word itself comes from the Latin vespera, meaning evening, and it's been a fixture in the monastic schedule since the days when Rome was more than a historical footnote. This isn't just about singing pretty songs, though. It's a moment of reflection, a chance to review the day's events and prepare for the night ahead. You know, because introspection is best done when you're not busy tilling fields or transcribing Aristotle. Now, let's talk numbers. While the precise length of a Vespers service can vary, we're generally looking at about 30 to 45 minutes of chanting and prayer. But don't let the brevity fool you. This isn't just a spiritual cool-down. It's the linchpin of the liturgical day. The psalms sung here are carefully chosen for their themes of thanksgiving and supplication, a reminder that even as darkness falls, the divine light endures. It's a bit like a medieval lullaby, soothing the soul before the long night ahead. But why all the emphasis on evening prayer? Well, in the grand tapestry of monastic life, Vespers is the thread that ties the day's labor and prayer together, a culmination of the monk's daily quest for spiritual elevation. It's a direct line to the divine, a chance to express gratitude for the day's blessings and seek strength for tomorrow's challenges. In an age when life is as unpredictable as a medieval weather forecast, this daily ritual provides a sense of stability and continuity. It's about finding peace in discipline, a concept that, let's be honest, could give modern mindfulness practices a run for their money. Let's not ignore the economic implications, either. The church's acoustics aren't just for show. They're a testament to the architectural ingenuity that ensures every chant and hymn is heard in crystal clarity. The design is intentional, a marvel of medieval engineering that doesn't just amplify sound, but also elevates the spirit. And while you might not find a price tag hanging from the rafters, the cost of building such a space is no small feat. The stone, timber, and labor involved rival any modern construction project, a testament to the monastery's role as both spiritual and economic powerhouses. As the last notes of Vespers fade into silence, the monks disperse, each returning to his cell for personal reflection. This isn't just downtime, it's a chance to internalize the day's lessons and prepare for the night's rest. The cycle of prayer and labor that defines monastic life isn't just about filling time, it's about sanctifying it. In a world where chaos often reigns, the monastery offers a model of order and purpose, a structured path to spiritual enlightenment that's as relevant today as it was 1,000 years ago. Now, before you start romanticizing this as the ultimate spiritual retreat, remember that monastic life demands more than just a commitment to prayer. It's a rigorous routine that requires discipline, resilience, and a willingness to embrace the mundane as sacred. The rule of St. Benedict, which serves as the blueprint for many monastic communities, emphasizes the importance of balance between prayer and work, solitude and community, body and soul. It's a philosophy that resonates even in today's fast-paced world, where finding equilibrium can feel like chasing a mirage. And let's not overlook the broader impact. The legacy of monastic life extends far beyond the cloistered walls. Monasteries are the original think tanks, their contributions to agriculture, education, and economics shaping the course of European history. They preserve knowledge during the so-called Dark Ages, laying the groundwork for the Renaissance and influencing everything from modern education systems to sustainable farming practices. The monastic model of community living, with its emphasis on shared goals and mutual support, offers timeless lessons in resilience and cooperation. So, as you close the door on another day in the monastery, take a moment to reflect on the enduring legacy of this ancient way of life. It's a story of faith and fortitude, a testament to the power of community and the pursuit of higher purpose. In a world that often glorifies individualism, the monastic ideal of living for something greater than oneself offers a refreshing perspective. It's a reminder that while the world outside may change, the quest for meaning and connection remains a constant in the human experience. As the night deepens and the monastery settles into silence, remember that the cycle will begin anew with the first light of dawn. The bell will ring, the monks will rise, and the dance of prayer and labor will resume. It's a rhythm as ancient as the stones themselves, a timeless testament to the enduring power of devotion and the pursuit of the divine. And in this quiet corner of the world, where the sacred and the mundane intertwine, the monks continue their centuries-old journey towards spiritual fulfillment, one prayer at a time.